Good morning. Welcome to the regular council meeting town of Qualicum Beach. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and the first thing I want to say is that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. And the next item is the agenda. Any changes to the agenda? I have a late adder that I would like to bring up during my report. Anything else? Then the agenda is amended by consent. Adoption of the consent agenda. There's the correspondence log and the announcement of council meeting motions. Anything to be discussed? Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I had one. It was an item of correspondence that I'd like to pull and have placed on the next agenda with regard to the renaming of the containment pond.
Thank you. Duly noted. So that goes on for the December 6th council meeting. Councillor Harrison.
Too many things in front of me. Just briefly, there was an email about leaded gas, and there's just some information the public might want to know about that.
Thank you, and that is entirely appropriate. This is about aviation fuel? Yeah. I'm sorry you missed the meeting yesterday, because that was one of the major topics that people are concerned about with leaded fuel. So we definitely would like to talk about that. Thank you. Anything else? Then the adopted consent agenda is approved. Adopted. Approval of the minutes from the regular council meeting on 11th and October 24th. Any errors or omissions? Ms. Winston.
Thank you. Yes, on page 7 of your package under community development for Councillor Vander, Valk, it states that she attended the September 28th Oceanside Community Wellness Network meeting, and that is actually now called NOW, N-O-W, which is NATSMA Oceanside Wellness. So we'll make that correction.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
And then just under my report, I've let staff know that I was not at the September 27th Parks and Recreation Committee meeting. I thanked Councillor Vander Valk for chairing that meeting for me. So if that could be reflected, that would be great.
Oh, and another change to the agenda is the withdrawal of the Flowerstone Health Society presentation, and also the request for the 30,000, so that's off. Next item is sorry, Councillor Harrison?
There was an in-camera item. I discussed it with staff previously, but because it's in camera, I won't discuss it publicly. So
okay.
When we have an in-camera later today, so we'll discuss it then.
Thank you.
But just about the minutes, so yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So then for delegations, we have one, Sue Big Oil, Roy Culver. You have up to 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Roy Culver. I live in Eagle Crest. I've been there for 8 years, and I'm a mechanical engineer for 40 plus years, long-term environmentalist and recent activist when it comes to environment. We're getting ourselves into some serious trouble here, folks. The good news is that the town has dealt with this overall topic with the community climate change adaptation plan, and it's really good work when I read it. It's probably out of date right now with the numbers that are coming in. So without further ado, we're gonna need a lot of money to make this thing work. So I've got Andrew Gage from West Coast Environmental Law, who is spearheading the Sue Big Oil campaign, and he'll go through the details.
Andrew.
Hello, Council. Thank you for hearing from me, and I'm pleased to be here on the traditional territory of the Qualicum Nation. I'm hoping to convince you that it would be fiscally irresponsible to continue to just pass the costs of climate change, which are rising, on to taxpayers and residents without making efforts to recover a fair share of those costs from the companies that have profited most and played a major role in creating the climate change crisis. Not advancing. BC communities, and certainly including Qualicum Beach, have seen huge climate change related costs. I was amazed to see just how many impacts might be traced back to climate change here. Plan, you identified 31 actions across 9 objectives and give rough estimates as to their costs. None of them are considered high costs, but if you add up all of the medium and low cost items, you're looking at somewhere between $1.2 and $13 million in costs in the coming years. These costs are only going to rise And without additional funds, you have a choice between raising taxes, cutting services, or leaving Qualicum Beach vulnerable to the climate impacts. And these are, of course, the costs of preparing for climate change, not dealing with the impacts that occur. Meanwhile, scientists are increasingly able to identify or to quantify the specific contributions of individual companies to climate change. Just 90 entities are responsible for almost 2/3 of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, most of them fossil fuel companies, through their operations and their products. Many of the same companies were told in 1959 that their products would cause climate change and rising sea levels by Dr. Edward Teller, who addressed the American Petroleum Institute on the future of energy. And in the decades that followed, they invested in research, they commissioned studies, and they learned more. And by the 70s and 80s, they had detailed information about how burning fossil fuels would impact communities like Qualicum Beach and others around the world. And throughout all of that, they pursued a business-as-usual scenario in which they expanded their oil and gas, made massive profits, while failing to develop the alternatives that they held patents on. When the government started responding, and in the late 80s and early 90s started working on solving this problem, they engaged in a massive campaign to mislead the public, to lobby against actions and to present false solutions. And we still see companies to this day, just this year, BP, Shell, and Suncor have all said that they will delay their action on climate change because they're making too much money from fossil fuels. The lawsuit proposed by the So Big Oil campaign is legally possible. We've seen, there's a picture of the Friends of the Earth Netherlands celebrating their successful lawsuit against Shell. We've seen lawsuits against tobacco and opioids. And to date, there are more than 40 local and state governments in the US suing fossil fuel companies, and 28 Canadian law professors say there's a strong basis for a claim here. It's financially manageable because we're proposing bringing this as a class action lawsuit with BC's local governments pooling their resources. We're asking each local government just to contribute $1 per resident to get to the certification stage of the class action and confirm that there's a legal basis for the claim. So it's every community can contribute. And we know that when British Columbians understand that the alternative to this lawsuit is that we pay all of the costs and the fossil fuel industry pays nothing, they by and large support it. Early on in the process, a judge will confirm that there's an arguable case, that we'll have information confirming that this is possible. And ultimately, we're trying to get resources for communities to prepare for climate change, but also to change corporate behavior when the true costs of fossil fuels are on the balance sheets of these companies. So we're asking you to join with the 3 municipalities that have committed to this process to date, View Royal, Gibsons, and Squamish, and can support the So Big Oil lawsuit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions to the delegation? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so if the town was then to participate in a class action lawsuit and the lawsuit was to fail in the courts, and I'm assuming this would be a very complicated lawsuit, this is not something you just do in 3 months. It'd be several years, teams of lawyers. I'm sure the oil company would have a battery of very expensive lawyers to defend them. If they were successful, who would be paying for the lawyer fees for the oil companies? Because when you lose, you have to pay both parties.
In general, that's the case. It's not the case for class action lawsuits in BC. It is, other jurisdictions have different rules, but in BC, our class action legislation says that the parties generally do not pay for the other side's legal fees. It's an exception to the rule you're referring to. And I'll also emphasize again that the first stage in a class action is for a judge to rule that the case should proceed as a class action, and that includes ruling that the case has merit. So very early on in the process, the local governments will have confirmation that this case is worth pursuing.
Anyone else? Thank you for taking the time to explain that to us. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
And it's just for your information, we don't take action of any kind after a delegation until we've had time and converse with staff as well.
Sure. If there's any information we should be providing to staff to aid in that, please let us know. We're happy to share the information we have.
Thank you. So the next item is correspondence, and I just noticed that we have a guest from Parksville, Councillor Joel Grens. Welcome. Correspondence, there is the plant-based board treaty and there's a staff recommendation. Who'd like to put Councillor Skipsey, seconded by Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion. Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah, I'll just mention that when we had our mitigation workshop, there was some interest by some of the members to get into, delve more into the food security piece. So I think this would be appropriate, and I think the members of the committee would be interested in having this discussion. So.
Thank you. Anyone else for discussion? Ready for the question? Councillor Harrison.
Oh, just to say too, at VIA, there was a pretty long session. I believe it was myself and Councillor Vander Valk were in the room. I don't think there was anyone else, but there was a half-day session just on food security. And there were actually folks who were engaged in that in Qualicum Beach, actually at my table. So it was very interesting. And they're from France, so I got to practice a little bit of French, so that was also really fun. But no, it's actually is a pertinent issue. I think it's a good thing for them to talk about.
Yes, I agree. When that section was happening, I saw you there, and Councillor Vander. I went to the other end of the hall where there was another presentation about food security. So this a big deal now. So thank you, Councillor Skipsey, for bringing that forward. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Then we have the Qualicum Beach Christmas concert request for sponsorship, or there's several things council could do. We could deny the request. We could offer a reduced rate for the rental, or make a contribution. I think because we have a no grants and aid policy, I think the best thing we would do would be in kind, which we often do, and that would be a reduction of or a waiving of the fee to rent the hall to the Qualicum Beach Christmas concert with the Victoria Symphony. What is council's wish? Council, both hands come out at the same time, so I'll let you go first.
I think the mayor's on the right track, that we should treat this like a nonprofit that's applying for a reduced rate and treat them the same as any other nonprofit, and that would significantly reduce the cost.
It would. Councillor Skipsey?
Yeah, when I saw this on the agenda, I reached out to staff to try to figure out sort of what the expenses were, whether the $2,300 was all room rental or what. So I was provided with a bit of information. So almost $1,000 is the room rental cost. Some of the other things that involve actual costs to the town, such as having the piano tuned and whatnot. So I would suggest that we provide $1,000 off. That would cover the room rental. And that would qualify us, I think, for the base level sponsorship for the symphony.
Thank you. So that's your motion, to reduce it by $1,000?
Yes.
Councillor Harrison is kind of thinking about it. So seconding. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. We have the library board appointments, which means no change, as we all have agreed that we don't really change the areas of our primary interest. So could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Housekeeping bylaw. So, Councillor, Ms. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The housekeeping bylaw is an opportunity to correct minor errors and/or clarify minor issues in the zoning bylaw. We introduce these bylaws from time to time. This is a topic and bylaw that has proceeded through several council meetings, and recently a public hearing was held and third reading was given. The recommendation today is for adoption. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Thank you. Could I have a motion for adoption? Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vander Valk. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Zoning amendment, 127, 141 Fifth Avenue East. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I do have a slide just for a little bit of context for members of the public that might not be aware of this property. So this is an existing multifamily development that has two buildings, and the proposal by the landowner is that those two buildings be permitted to subdivide so that each of the buildings could be owned and operated independently. This is essentially no change from a physical perspective. So, after the subdivision is complete, there wouldn't be any additional buildings. The buildings would stay exactly where they are. It would just be a change on paper. It's something to do with the ownership model that the owner is wanting to pursue in the future. So Staff are relatively neutral on this. There's no major benefit to the town and its residents, but at the same time, there's no major reason to withhold that as you know, it is potentially providing some flexibility for the owner in the long term. So the recommendation at this point is to give it second reading and to schedule a public hearing so members of the public have an opportunity to come and share their perspectives on this matter. On the topic of public hearings, if I could take a slight digression, Council may be aware that the new legislation from the province does limit Council's ability to hold public hearings in regard to housing-related matters. This proposal does not add housing, and so it's not proposing housing, so it wouldn't necessarily comply for that exemption. And the second factor to consider is that this bylaw was already in progress as of the introduction of the legislation. So if you, just to make sure, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you thought, oh shoot, we weren't supposed to have a public hearing, that is not the case. So the recommendation is to hold the public hearing on December 8th. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Councillor Harrison.
And I'd also point out, sorry, just through the chair to Mr. Sales, so the relevant legislation is Bill 44. It's still at first reading, so it hasn't received royal assent. So until such time as it receives royal assent, those measures about public hearings would remain hypothetical. But the big thing here is I actually have two family members who bought a lot together, and my dad was a former lawyer, and his advice to them is actually don't do that. If something happens to one person in the household, it can get really messy. What if one member of that household wants to leave, the other doesn't, and then you have a real problem with selling the land? So this is just something where you probably have two households, and they want to be individually, you know, considered. Makes a lot of sense, and there's no impact on the actual physical characteristics of anything, so I think it's reasonable.
Thank you. My dad was a farmer, and he told me the same thing. Stay out of it. So it's for second reading. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And for the public hearing to be set at December 6th. Now, we have been trying to accommodate people who can't make it in the morning, and we've had some public hearings later in the afternoon. However, I think this is so, in my opinion, so innocuous that, so I think we can be okay with 10 o'clock as far as the public hearing in this situation. So I need a motion to proceed with for the public hearing on December 6th at 10 o'clock. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Then my report, and as I alluded to earlier, the late adder, and that is from a result of the minister's announcement last week about housing and community plans, but also about the fact that this would apply to the urban containment boundary, within the urban containment boundary only. And I was personally quite disappointed that there was no effort to work with regional districts, where from quite a few years ago, I think at least 10 years ago, we had a regional growth strategy that would allow for communities like Qualicum Beach to be built between us and Deep Bay, I think 3 areas. Bowser, Lighthouse Country, areas like that, where they could start a community like ours. Because from my perspective and what I've read about planning, most people enjoy living in a place between 7,000 and 14,000 people. There's a community spirit, they can have enough income to provide for the amenities and so on. And that's not going to be in the cards at all. I have friends who live in Nanuus who would like to build a detached secondary home or suite, not going there. So the focus is on us. And imagine if every lot in town could have, what I can see, a fourplex. The burden on the infrastructure, water lines, sewer lines, roads, amenities. Last night there was a news article about Langford dealing with this situation. And they said, yeah, we're building, and we're one of the fastest growing cities in BC. But there are no schools being planned, there is no education services that match the growth that they want. And the same with us. You know, Parksville is already struggling with water. Imagine if every lot in Parksville could have a fourplex, how that affects services. So I've made this notice of motion, and there's now a motion because it's on the table, that council directs staff to prepare an official community plan amendment that would update the urban containment boundary to be aligned with the boundaries of the village neighborhood. So what the minister is saying, we want higher density inside the urban containment boundary. That area that we call village neighborhood was planned for higher density. So we're not undermining him or working against him. We're aligning ourselves with him to identify the area that we think we can accommodate as far as our services are concerned. So that's my notice of motion. That is now my motion, and I'll read it out for the benefit of the public. That council directs staff to prepare an official community plan amendment that would update the urban containment boundary to be aligned with the boundaries of the village neighborhood. If I could have a seconder, please. Councillor Vander Valk. And at this point, I'd like to ask our staff to comment as well. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The proposed legislation, as Councillor Harrison indicated earlier, is still in progress. However, it will have major implications on the town, and I do think the town should be forward-thinking in adapting to the coming changes. Specific to the motion that you're proposing, there is a slight refinement and some additions that you'd see on the agenda. So in order to look forward and be proactive, we think staff does need to prepare a report, and that very well may lead to an OCP amendment, making the changes that you're contemplating. But there's some other issues that we need to think about and maybe consult with the town's legal counsel. Secondly, there will be implications coming out of this housing bill, and some of those are itemized here. So first of all, there is a recommendation that town staff start the work of preparing to update the land use and subdivision bylaw, or otherwise known as the zoning bylaw, before that deadline, which is June 30th of next year. And secondly, the council is very well aware that the town is preparing a quality of life survey that was intended to be issued in January. However, if we proceed with issuance in January, there will be no opportunity to ask housing-related questions that may come out of the housing manual that the province is intending to release in December. So some minor variations and an extension onto the motion that Mayor Westbrook has put forward, and if you'd consider those, we would prepare a report at an upcoming meeting. Thank you. And sorry if I should note, I do have some slides about the overall housing legislation if you'd like to hear some more about this. Thank you.
So what we're dealing with here is my motion was fairly concise, but if staff would like, or council would like to include the staff recommendation, we can do that if council so wishes. Councillor Young, Councillor Skipsey. So what this means that my motion is amended to include the staff recommendation, which are not opposing or undermining each other, so to speak. They are in the same vein, but it has more details, and I appreciate that. So the motion now is to, the motion that I made and also the staff recommendation be included in one motion. Councillor Harrison? Okay. Yep. So that was moved by Councillor Skipsey and Councillor Vander Valk. No, Councillor Young, sorry, Councillor Young moved that, and Councillor Skipsey seconded it. So discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Well, first I'm just going to request division with the three recommendations, because I'm assuming we're just doing the three, there's not four, because the first staff recommendation is essentially a reiteration of the original notice of motion. But there's a few different points to think about. One is that if we restrict our urban containment boundary to the village neighborhood, the OCP says that you are not to provide services to properties that are outside the urban containment boundary, which means Oceanside doesn't get town water ever. They're outside the urban containment boundary now. What happens to a subdivision? What happens to properties that are on septic and a well and then want to switch over to town services? They'd be prevented from doing so. So I think there are huge ramifications to this, which are not in the staff report, which actually do need to be considered prior to actually suggesting this as a course of action. So I think that's, for me, the biggest thing is that we haven't got all the details from the province yet. That'll come in December, and we might want to hold off on making resolutions about this until December. The second thing I'd point out, too, is that I found it very interesting watching the first day of this legislature when you have the BC Conservatives arriving as a party officially. And the first speech given by John Rustad, who's the leader, was on Sochi, and I didn't agree with Mr. Rustad's position. And David Eby loved the question, and he laid into it and basically said, how dare you ask this question, this is terrible. This is probably the single piece of legislation David Eby, as the Premier, cares about more than any other. I would suggest we don't become the first community to try to find a way around the legislation, because that will put us in the province's crosshairs. I think the better course of action is just defer this until December, when we actually have the update from the province of what the legislation is. There are reasonable questions about this. I was speaking to a member of the public just before the meeting. Water is the obvious one for me. We have a finite amount of water. If we triple our population, I'm not sure our water service keeps up. So I think there's a very fair question to the province about what have you considered, not just the cost of the services, but the amount of stuff we have. Like, can we actually do this? But yeah, I just suggest that we wait a month, get the update from the province for their guidelines, then think about resolutions to make. And I'd also suggest we don't want to be the first off the starters blocks on this, because I do think Mr. Eby would be more inclined to take a strong view of things, and that could lead to other changes in the regulation we don't foresee. So I'd actually make a motion to defer for the December, until such time as the province has provided their regulation update.
Motion to defer, is there a seconder? No seconder, then we'll continue on. Councillor Skipsey. You defer, motion to defer? The debate on the defer, okay.
Well, I didn't want to defer because I wanted to at least have an opportunity to have a comment, but now that it's been deferred.
Oh, it's not deferred.
Debating the deferral.
We're debating
the
defer. We have to
deferral.
vote.
Okay,
We'll
well,
have to
I
vote
actually
on it.
think deferral is not a bad idea because, as Councillor Harrison pointed out, there could be some unintended consequences of this decision, and what could those be? And I think, I guess it's no surprise that this was coming. Actually, in our last term, then Councillor Westbrook took this to the AVICC, and it was passed on the floor there and went to UBCM, where a resolution was also adopted. And that was basically that UBCM petitioned the government of British Columbia to preserve existing local government authority for development approvals and to consult local governments before exploring any changes to local government authority for development approvals. So I think one of the tools that we might have is to be in touch with UBCM to see how they are handling this announcement on behalf of local governments in British Columbia. I'm sure we're not the only ones that are concerned about the impacts. And also, I noticed on social media the other day that our MLA is currently seeking input from community about how community members feel about this legislation and its impacts. So if people do have concerns, I would suggest that you reach out to our MLA and share that. He's actually got a survey, I think, online. But I think that's it. I mean, I do think this could be a workaround, but I would like to know what the consequences are of doing that.
Thank you for the discussion. Councillor Vander.
Thank you. I think that the town should be proactive rather than reactive. So if we sit and wait for the provincial government to roll out its edict, then what control are we going to, or what options do we have? So perhaps not going forward with this motion and deferring it, but at the same time having communication with the province to say these are our concerns and see if they have any feedback for us, because it seems like they've just kind of plunked this, even though it's maybe been a bit of an ongoing process, but it feels like they've just decided this is the way it's going to be. And I think that we should try to have some communication with the province in terms of what our concerns are and have they thought about this before they say this is our final decision and this is what's going to happen. So I would like to see us have a proactive approach rather than.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
I appreciate that the province is concerned about density and bringing in more housing, but I would like to defer the motion to see what our staff has to say about our infrastructure and how we can support it, and go from there.
Sorry? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous to assume on the province's part, actually, provincial government's part, I think it's dangerous to assume that just because you build more housing is going to be more affordable. So I think it's a very basic question of they're increasing density, but again, who are they increasing density for? What population is going to benefit?
This is about deferring.
Okay.
If we hadn't been deferred it, this would be entirely appropriate conversation.
Okay. My
So,
apologies.
On the deferment, I think you made your point about not wanting to defer it. Ms. Svensson.
I would just like clarity on the deferment, because I heard two different things. Are we deferring until the provincial update is received, or deferring until the December meeting?
If I may, just because I'm not clear, the province on their website, when they said we'll provide you the regulations in December, they didn't provide a date in December, unfortunately, at this time. And Mr. Sales can correct me if I'm wrong. I think is it the 2nd? Oh, 6th. It might not be available then. So I thought there was a second meeting in December. I could be wrong off the top of my head. Sorry, I have to
Committee of the Whole on the 13th.
Okay.
I just want to be clear on the resolution so council's clear. So now we have it as that moved Councillor Harrison, seconded Councillor Young, that the defer till the provincial update is received.
That's right. That was the wording.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I may, just through the chair, it might be a good idea if we do get an update, even if it's just a verbal update on the 13th, as part of the committee of the whole meeting. We're already meeting. And then if we've received the regulations by then, I think we would by December 13th, because I'm assuming the provincial government, their staff, they probably wouldn't be releasing things around Christmas, bluntly speaking. Their own staff, they wouldn't want them responding to all the questions that'll immediately come out right around the Christmas holidays. But Mr. Sales might have more clarity on when the deadline is.
Mr. Seals?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison, you are correct that they've been vague. They just said December 2023 in terms of the release of the policy manual. So it's not the regulations, it's the policy manual, which basically has all the details about what the requirements will be for municipalities, what we need to set the height at, what we need to set setbacks at. All that stuff is coming out. I would also assume it should be near the beginning of December, because no one wants to read policy manuals over their holiday break. However, we don't know for sure, so if council would indulge some flexibility in terms of the timing of a verbal report, we'll bring information as soon as we can.
Personally, I'm not in favor of deferring it till whenever they come out with information. This is simply to prepare a report so we can be ready to move if we have to. Anyway, on the question of deferment, all in favor? Opposed? Sorry? You look like you're not sure if you want to vote in favor or not.
I'm wondering, for clarification, if we could just defer the rest of it and carry on with staff preparing a report.
Well, we have to move on the motion to defer first. So on the motion to defer, all in favor? Opposed? Motion to defer fails. So there was a request to do them serial items, so we'll do them one at a time. Since my top of the motion basically is the same as the staff recommendations, first paragraph, we can vote on that one. Does that make sense, Ms. Svensson?
Are you going to withdraw your notice motion then? Because for clarity, we
Yes,
have your
I
notice
think that
motion on the
to
floor.
clarify that, I'll withdraw my piece and go straight into the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everybody? Yep, okay. So on the first recommendation, and you see it on the screen, could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, Valk, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I just want to point out too, with the regulation, there's funding for OCP updates, and there's timelines when OCP updates have to be done. So that's already part of the legislation. Like, we are going to probably have to change our OCP review process in terms of the timelines to meet the legislated requirements. So yeah, I don't agree with this because I think there's a whole slew of unintended consequences, and I also think too that it's going to send a message to the province that we're trying to find a workaround, and I think it'll be actually detrimental to the town's interests as a result.
Thank you. Maybe, but you know, not long ago, the province came out with a deal about the use of opioids, crack, everything, on the beach, at playgrounds, in parks. And then they realized, oops, we've gone a bit too far, let's find a balance. So it seems like they often shoot and ask questions later. This is another one of these examples. So we have to make sure that our town is going to function as far as our services are concerned and amenities. Like I said about Langford, who was on the news last night, but I imagine other communities are struggling with the same thing. What about the policing and fire departments and schools? They said, if we're doing this, we need another 3 elementary schools, and there's no provision for that. More healthcare services. So the province has a tendency to come out with these czars and then realize that they should have consulted with us. And that motion that you just read that went to the UBCM and passed unanimously, it was to encourage the province to consult with us. We just had a UBCM not long ago. There was no consultation about this. So I'm sorry, Mr. Premier, when you were the housing minister, you came out with those statements that local governments should not be involved in planning for development when it comes to height restrictions, the location of the development, could be in a golf course, or parking requirements. I mean, what's the point of us being here if somebody can just take the plan to Victoria and somebody stamps approved on that and we're sitting here like a Harvey Campbell to provide the services for that? So no, I think we have a lot more experience in local governments than perhaps what's in the provincial government. And I think we need to show that we are not saying you can't have higher density in the urban containment boundary, we're just defining the urban containment boundary. And I would love to speak with the minister, and tomorrow I have a chance to speak with the minister on the Zoom, and I will explain that to him. This is not us against them, but trying to work with you. We are responsible to provide provisions of services. And so this blindsided us completely. It's going to take over our agenda, this term's agenda, about this kind of thing, where we all of a sudden have to change direction, change course, and like you said, Councillor Harrison, this will affect our urban containment, our OCP review, and everything else that we do in regards of that. So I think this is the right approach. Further discussion, Councillor Harrison.
Just to point out too, when we had UBCM, actually scheduled a staff meeting, and my suggestion was they have a phased approach with a different percentage of residential lots depending on size of community. So you scale it up from maybe 50% of residential for a smaller community. So some areas are essentially this. But at that stage, it's a month before everything's being tabled in the legislature, so obviously they're not going to change everything because someone has a clever idea. But I also think too, though, that the fundamental root of this is the fact that there is a housing crisis in British Columbia, and our community is not immune to that either. Unfortunately, it only really impacts renters in Qualicum Beach. Homeowners do a lot better, although some folks are struggling. So I understand where the province is coming from. I think, in my view, the reason I don't support this is I think of our legalization of secondary suites, which is across all of BC. So I believe the electoral areas are subject to the secondary suite legislation. They're just not subject to the density legislation. But how many secondary suites do we build in an average month? 1.5 on average. There's slightly more than, I think it's around 15 in the last building report for secondary suites in Qualicum Beach year to date. So slightly more than 1 a month when it's legal in almost all of the town. Right? So the supposition that it's immediately going to become 4 homes on every lot in Qualicum Beach, I don't think that's going to happen. We still have the same number of builders, same number of people actually doing the work. So I don't think it's going to change some areas, but I don't think it's going to be quite as consequential. There's a separate motion I was thinking of doing that was slightly different to this, but again, there's a motion on the floor, so you don't talk about other motions. But yeah, I don't agree with the restriction of the urban containment boundary. I think if we remove the portion for discussing alignment with the village neighborhood, but just looking at what do we have to do with the urban containment boundary, what are the impacts on services, do we have the ability to serve how many people? We've had that 12,000 population cap for ages in our OCP. That's going to be done through the OCP review process anyways. There's not really a need to do a separate motion for that. But I just think the idea of really tightly restricting urban containment boundary has a ton of unintended consequences.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councillor Vander. Now you can make your comments.
Well, my assumption is that the staff report would tell us what the consequences would be, or that's what I'm hoping. So to say that there would be unintended consequences, it might be a good idea to wait until we have the report and what those consequences might be. But I would like to see a report.
Mr. Seals.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The implications of the housing legislation are broad-reaching, and I think we need to be realistic about the fact that between now and the time of presenting a report to council, there's no way staff can assess all the unintended consequences of this. So in the slides that I had prepared, I was hoping to just itemize some of the things that will need to be amended as a result of this. And as we start to explore the implications, we'll need to amend more. There's only so much we know at this point, but to Councillor Vander Valk's point and question, how much development, how much growth can our infrastructure handle? That's a very key question that we need to grapple with, and so we will have to update all of our infrastructure plans as a result of this amendment, and an assessment, but that will take years. So. Just to be realistic, the motion actually only would present a report on the timeline and the process for the amendment. The actual implications, whether intended or unintended, will take a long time to explore. So I just want to make sure that expectation is clear, because there's only so much information staff can provide and explore between now and the time of a report in December. Thank you.
We understand. Thank you. Further discussion. Councillor Young?
Can we revisit the voting and see if we still?
No, we're moving on. We're voting.
moving on?
We call the question. We're calling the question.
Sorry.
After discussion. Any further discussion?
I just feel that it's just really important to have a report about what our infrastructure will be able to accommodate before we go ahead with densifying the urban containment boundary. And I want to make sure that the urban containment boundary can handle this. And so if we don't have a report, I don't want to be making that change. Sorry.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Harrison?
I just think, for me, the obvious thing is one of the first things in our OCP, the second sentence when we're discussing the urban containment boundary. Urban growth will be restricted to areas inside the UCB where municipal sewer and water services may be provided. And that's what I was referring to earlier. If you're outside the UCB, you do not get water and sewer hookups, period. And its only exceptions is for health and safety reasons. So that has significant implications for Qualicum Woods, Eagle Crest, Chartwell, the whole area along Laburnum. There's a huge amount of land in town that's already residential, where there are a ton of consequences from that. And that's not something where you really need a staff report. It's just in our OCP. You just need to be familiar with it.
Well, not exactly. The Totson development was outside the urban containment boundary. We amended the OCP. We amended the land use planning, all to accommodate a development that was outside the urban containment boundary, right in our state property. So if there is a real need, and I hope someday soon, we will be able to provide water to the oceanside strata, there are ways to deal with that.
Just as a point of clarification, the urban containment boundary was part of the OCP amendment. So the urban containment boundary did expand to include the Totson property. Similarly as how the cottage development by the Eagle Crest Golf Course, the urban containment boundary shifted to allow for that development to be included within it. So the supposition that you can do that without changing the urban containment boundary, we'd be breaking our own OCP in order to do that. So that was actually done as part of it.
You know, if we hadn't changed, made all these departures from our fish community plan, the previous term, I think we would be in a different spot today. But we have seen, and that's why I think there was a change in council, many departures from the fish community plan. So it's not uncommon for us, if we see a real need that has to happen, we can find a way to make it happen. It's just a matter of willingness. Councillor, or Ms. Varela.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Worship, but could we direct the questions about urban containment boundary back to staff? I think the Director of Planning may want to add comment to the more technical discussion that's happening at the table about policy.
Certainly. Thank you. Mr.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I did want to just highlight that the staff recommendation, if this were to proceed, would be to prepare a report for that change, but not just the change to the boundary. So as Councillor Harrison rightly points out, there's the OCP is a complex document, and you can't change one little thing without, taking a look at the implications. So when it comes to servicing, I don't think there would be any intention to withhold servicing from the areas outside of the village neighborhood. So what that implies for the changes needed to wording and other parts of the document, that's what staff would have to work through. So I just want to be clear that if council advanced this, it wouldn't be just a line on the map that changes. There would be other incidental changes probably throughout the document to ensure that it's internally consistent. Thank you.
The discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Harrison, Councillor Young opposed. There's a second paragraph. Further, the Town of Qualicum Beach Land Use Subdivision Bylaw number 580/1999 be amended prior to June 2024 in accordance with the provincial housing announcement from November 2nd, 2023. Could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander. Discussion. Councillor Harrison.
So just in terms of the timeline set by the province for when certain things have to be done, is this then a logical consequence of the given timelines from the legislation?
Mr. Seals?
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Harrison, that's correct. June 30th is the deadline for municipalities to update the zoning so that all single-family lots within the urban containment boundary permit 4 units. Thank you.
Thank you. There's further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Were you opposed, Councillor? Opposed, approved, passed unanimously. And then the final one, Mr. Seals. I'd like you to speak to that.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So, as we've kind of alluded to, the changes that will come out of the housing legislation are broad-reaching, and there are things that staff will have to do that we don't even know about yet. So, we did want to make sure that it's on the books so that council has an opportunity to weigh in and provide direction to staff. Just in terms of the expectations around delivering the major projects that were identified earlier this year in the 2023 strategic plan. So the recommendation here is that with the exception of the projects that are currently underway, that those major projects be deferred until staff has had time to reassess the matter. And specific to the quality of life survey, the request is that the delivery date for that be deferred until staff and the official community plan review steering committee have had an opportunity to incorporate any potential questions coming out of that policy manual into the document. So the delivery date would be deferred into further next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brilla.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as UBCM refers to this, it is provincial housing legislation that's being introduced, resulting in sweeping changes to local government planning framework. I think the resolution before council actually reflects the fact that we're going to have to adjust your strategic plan as we had currently or previously anticipated. You're going to see changes on the scoping sheets that we've been working feverishly to accommodate, to say we had originally planned for an initiative in 2025. It's now being moved to 2027 or 2028. So we're actually on the fly trying to amend the scoping sheets to reflect this, but I think it is the reality of this legislation being handed over that this cannot be business as usual, especially for the planning department as well as corporate services.
Thank you. My question, my question is that if we change the urban containment boundary, where we already had plans for the services to be provided for higher density, why would that affect the rest of the planning and the OCP review? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure if you would indulge the Director of Planning, because I think that's exactly what his slide spoke to, is giving both council and the public a heads up to what the scope of this is going to be, and then even following those zoning and OCP amendments, what else we're going to have to consider at the operational and technical levels.
Council like to see these now? Yeah? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Ms. Kuhl, if you could pull those up. Okay, so I would like to take this opportunity to provide an overview of the changes that are included in Bill 44, the Housing Statutes Amendment Act. This is still under consideration by the province, but the timelines are fairly clear, and assuming that it does proceed as is, it has major implications for the work plan in the years to come. Next slide. So I'm just going to itemize the big points that they're moving in this act, and also the timelines. And then at the very end of the presentation, we'll discuss some of the implications that aren't specifically identified by the province. So the first big one, or at least for the province overall, is that secondary suites will be permitted in residential zoning throughout the province. This doesn't really affect the town so much because we already permit secondary suites in almost every zone in the town. There are some exceptions in the Eagle Crest neighborhood. So coincidentally, this aligns with the getting rid of land use contracts. So there's no point in asking them anymore whether they want secondary suites because they're getting secondary suites. But so this is, we're warming up to the bigger ones here. This one's not a big deal for the town. Next slide. Okay, so this is probably the most significant change, and this is something that the province refers to as small-scale multi-unit housing. So this is developments of up to 4 units on a single residential lot. So in the town's context, this would be a lot that currently permits 1 single-family dwelling. That's the majority of the town's zoning throughout the town. And the requirement from the province is that the town amend its zoning so that every lot within the urban containment boundary permit 4 units. So there's lots of other parts in zoning bylaws, such as height, setbacks, parcel coverage, maximum size of accessory buildings, parking, all those types of things. Those will also need to change, but the province hasn't told us what those will be. Those are going to be released in the policy manual, which is anticipated for release in December. And I see Councillor Harrison is raising his hand. If there's something specific to this slide, it might be good to answer now.
Oh, if I may? Just through the chair. It's actually, just for clarity too, for smaller lots, it's 3. So there's a particular size, I think it's 2,000 meters squared, where if your lot is below that size, it's just 3 homes, not 4.
Through the chair, thank you for the clarification. I don't think the town has any lots that small, which is why I'm kind of glazing over it, but it is an important technicality. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so the other big move here is that the province is really moving towards a system where municipalities develop housing needs reports and they update them on a regular basis, and then OCPs and zoning bylaws flow out of the needs identified in those reports. So whereas in the past the town has had a housing needs report, we've only developed 1 in collaboration with the regional district, and it hasn't been updated in a number of years. That will need to be updated regularly. So the other big change is that there's going to be a standard methodology to the generation of those reports, and it has to have a 20-year timeline. So what are the housing needs of the municipality over the next 20 years? Next slide. Coming out of that, the municipalities, the town, will have to update its official community plan to allow for housing to accommodate all of the housing needs anticipated in that 20-year report. So if the housing needs assessment identified that the town would need, say, 5,000 units, there would be a requirement that the OCP be updated to accommodate those 5,000 units somewhere in the town. Next slide. Then the next step out of that is that, once again, the province is trying to front load consultation and also make everything generated from these housing needs reports. So coming out of the official community plan review, which anticipates 20 years of housing need, the zoning bylaws would have to be adopted and amended to reflect that housing needs. So essentially, whereas now the town has an OCP that looks ahead, say, 50 years, and there's areas in the OCP where housing potential is identified, but not necessarily, there's no expectation that it be developed immediately. The provincial legislation would require those two to move kind of in tandem. So this is an interesting point that we will have to kind of rethink in the way that we approach the OCP, because there may be some growth targets or strategies that are long-term, but not necessarily ready to move into immediately. So if the two documents have to be in direct alignment, we have to approach it a little bit differently. Next slide. So these are other changes that have been mentioned, but the parking requirements, this is potentially a big one. So I think that although it was listed under the other changes on my presentation, it's actually a pretty big one. So the province is going to be reducing parking requirements and or eliminating parking requirements for most residential developments. So what that means, it's hard to say, but the town currently has a parking requirement of 1 stall per residential unit in the village neighborhood. That is certainly going to decrease. So the implications of that is that you will see more people parking on the street.
Sorry, just going through the background or previously, the reduction in parking was for lots that were in close proximity to, I forget the exact term, which was frequent transit or something like that. But the intent was something that would be in proximity to, say, a SkyTrain station. They would remove all parking requirements for those lots, and there's a certain prescribed distance. The question would be if the bus service that the town operates, it wasn't clear if there would be a threshold where if we have our bus coming every 8 minutes instead of every 10 minutes, does that then trigger that provincial thing about the transit proximity? Because that would be the really important thing for our communities is through the RDN with their bus service, if that would trigger that, and then that would have a prescribed area around that bus stop where you wouldn't have any parking requirements.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the provincial legislation does refer to regular bus service or frequent bus service. The town does not have frequent bus service anywhere in town. And an hour is definitely, like hourly service is not frequent enough to trigger any of those. However, I would note that parking requirements will be reduced everywhere. They will be eliminated in areas with frequent bus service. So it's coming everywhere. And what that's going to do is it's going to displace a lot of parking onto the street. And we'll get back to that in just a sec because there's implications for our street standards. Okay, the other big whopper on this page is that public hearings will not be permitted for zoning amendments for housing projects that are consistent with the OCP. So in the past, the province has allowed municipalities to waive public hearings for developments that are consistent with the OCP. It's not an optional item anymore. Once this legislation goes through, municipalities will not be permitted to hold OCPs, or sorry, to hold public hearings for those proposals. Now, obviously the town places a lot of emphasis on public engagement and making sure that we have an opportunity to hear from people at various stages of development or policy development. So we're going to need to think about this. Like, how do we continue to engage the public when one of the primary mechanisms, which is the public hearing, is gone? So we may need to rethink the whole system. Either we front load it to the point where, our OCPs have such extensive public engagement that we've worked it out. We've talked to you, and then the zoning amendments are relatively incidental and implementation. So lots of ways it could be done, but this is going to be a major discussion point over the next few years as to how we continue to engage the public. Next slide. All right, so just to kind of sum it up here, and I apologize for the small text, I'll just read it out loud. So I think it's fair to say that the town does strongly support initiatives to create affordable housing. But I think it's also fair to say that form and character, environmental protection, and high quality of life are extremely important to the town and its residents. And then there's this requirement. We have to comply with the housing mandate from the province. So next slide. To me, this kind of stimulates the big question, which is, how can the town accelerate new housing creation in alignment with provincial direction while protecting the environment and maintaining a high quality of life for current residents and current and future residents? That's a little bit of a typo there. So how will we do that? And kind of listed out a laundry list of things that will need to be reviewed. So this includes the zoning bylaw, probably a complete overhaul of the zoning bylaw, official community plan amendments, multiple amendments on various topics, housing needs assessment we discussed earlier, those will need to be done on a regular basis. Development permit areas, we have development permit areas for various topics throughout the town. Form and character, I think, is going to be a huge discussion point in coming years because we do have the authority to enact form and character bylaws that cover all these multifamily dwellings, the small scale multi-unit developments proposed by the province. So we can regulate how they look. We can regulate how they interact with the street. We can't put in unreasonable form and character requirements that make it so hard to develop that no one does it. So we have to be reasonable, but this is a huge tool in the town's toolbox as we move forward. We talked about water capacity. Well, what about sanitary sewer? What about storm, pervious, impervious surfaces? There's a lot of implications that will come out of this. So I'd say our servicing bylaws will need to be updated and also our long-term planning for service provision. So we have planning engineering documents in the town that anticipate the build out of the OCP, which was currently estimated approximately 12,000 people. That will likely change as a result of this. We haven't run the numbers and everything, but it will change. So all those plans will need to be updated. I mentioned earlier with the change in parking regulation, the public realm and streets are going to play a much more important role moving forward because there isn't going to be, in not every lot will have room for a tree. Not every lot will have room for, the kind of landscaping expectations that we currently see throughout the town. So that means that those types of things will need to be in the public realm. We'll need, a street tree program, for example. We need to make sure we accommodate street parking in a way that's accessible with rocks on the boulevard. Probably not going to be an acceptable practice moving forward if there's nowhere else to park. So lots of things to think about there. Development procedures we need to reconsider because of the new structure that the province is setting up in terms of flowing from housing needs to OCP to zoning. That process needs to flow through to actual project approvals in a seamless way, or the province will probably take steps to make sure that we keep that flow of developments moving forward. So we will need to change our development procedures. Even just getting rid of the public hearings is a major change. I'm going to go through the second half just very quickly. I don't think we need to. I think you've gotten the point, after the discussion so far. We need to review our DCC bylaw. We need to review our community amenity contribution policy because it's likely that the province is making big moves. We may not be able to have a community amenity contribution policy. Tree protection bylaw. What do we do about tree protection when the province is contemplating, say, a 60% parcel coverage? That doesn't leave much room for trees. So how do we handle that in the context of tree protection? Parks and green spaces. If private lots don't have room for parks and green spaces, that increases the demand on public spaces. So how do we make sure that neighborhoods have access to greenery, have access to recreational opportunities when it's not on each individual lot? We need to review the officer and delegation bylaw because there needs to be a clearer delegation of responsibilities between council and staff, and the province in their policy manual likely will be kind of mandating some changes there. Staffing implications we haven't even really started to think about, but certainly if you're reviewing all of the engineering standards and all of the utility planning and all these plans, there could be implications and increased demand on staff. Public transit, not really the town's responsibility, but the density distribution throughout the town changes significantly if every lot has the potential for 4 units. So, and then I put in bold and more to be determined because as I said earlier, there's only so much we know at this point, and a lot will continue to come out. And the more you dig, the more you realize that there's other things that need to be changed. And then I put a big challenge accepted stamp here because I don't actually have this stamp and I've always wanted one. because I do think the town has a track record of being very innovative, forward-looking, and ambitious in terms of delivering services and high value to our residents. So not all the tools that we've had in the past to do that are going to be available to the town, but I think we have the tools that we'll need to kind of maintain that high service standard. So challenge accepted, details to be determined, but I think this is going to be an exciting time, and from my perspective, to be a planner, and for council. I hope you're excited too, because this is the biggest change I think BC local governments have had since local governments became local governments. So you're on the ground floor of major changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sales, for giving us a kind of a window of what we'll be looking through when we get to the legislation put through to the legislature. It's very disconcerting that we have a relatively short timeline, and that's why I wanted this motion that we passed earlier to start taking effect, because June 30th will happen soon, and we've got a lot of work to do, so I didn't want to delay it for that reason alone. However, Council, any questions regarding the presentation or what's on the discussion? Councillor Skipsey.
So I think, did this relate to the last recommendation that we had?
the third
Okay.
paragraph, yeah.
Because I guess the one comment I would have was that my understanding was the province was going to provide some funding to assist with this. So yes, there's a lot of work to be done, but maybe our staff could meet their supplement, with consultants or however that looks, I don't know, so that we can do some of our regular business along the way.
Sure. Any comment on that, Ms. Varela?
I think we'll be talking about it in strategic planning, that 85% of what staff does is actually its regular course of business. The additional 15% is the strategic initiatives that council adds on above the normal course of business. So this is normal course of business times 10, and we'll have to figure out how to accommodate that. And I'm sure we'll be coming back with some resourcing discussions with you. New initiatives will be a challenge that council has to wrap their head around. Of the 26 new initiatives that are proposed that you'll be discussing on Friday 1st, of the 26, 21 are proposed for the planning department. So you can see it will be a resourcing challenge, and it can't be solved solely by consultants, but it will be a discussion we'll have further on Friday.
Imagine if we're looking for consultants, what the rest of the province is doing. Consultants may be hard to find. Councillor Harrison.
And to Councillor Skipsey's point, it was $51 million was the amount that they'd allotted for all the different planning work that needs to be done. But the problem is they didn't say it would be distributed, how to be distributed. So a city like Vancouver, which probably has more work to do than Qualicum Beach, respectfully, there's just more to consider there. I don't know if it'd be distributed sort of like on a per capita basis, or if it would be each community gets a set amount. But even so, you divide it by about 200 local governments in BC, roughly. And you have the regional electoral areas, right? So you have around, and also I don't know if First Nations who've signed treaties might be included too. So let's ballpark 190 or so. But that money's going to be divided so many ways that I don't think it's going to be a huge amount of money at the end of the day, relative to the amount of work that needs to be done. But my issue is more that I think to our last term, where there are things that weren't in our strategic plan, where the province says, here's a huge pot of money if you want to do something. And so I'd point to the daycare. That was not in our strategic plan for the previous term. It was something that arose when the province says, we'll give you $2 million for a daycare. And then, so, okay, we sort of rush to take advantage of that. Part of the funds to actually handle it, because we took a very bizarre step to build it ourselves, which is usually not what we do. But that was done through additional funding inclusive with the grant. So I think the only problem I have with this is that sometimes the provincial or federal government will offer funds for things that are actually quite sizable. We don't see it coming. We don't know it's coming because, the provincial and federal governments love to make splashy announcements. And this might tie our hands when there's something that actually is deemed to be in the community benefit that we're just not aware of moving forward. I do think that it is a good conversation, strategic planning, to say we have to be very conservative with what we want to do. I think that point is well taken, but I wouldn't want to tie our hands completely through this resolution.
Thank you. And I don't think that's the intent from staff to say we're going to tie our hands completely until we all focus on that. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the recommendation that was before council actually excludes the processes that are already underway, and you've got some big blocks that the planning department's currently working on with the support of most of the other departments, including but not limited to the bus garage, the Saahtlam Park site design, the mobility study. You've got some really big pieces that are currently in stream. Again, that we're saying if they're already in stream, let's continue with those, accommodate what needs to be accommodated from the province. And the only one that we would recommend delaying would be the quality of life survey until we actually saw that provincial housing policy manual be delivered, because it could result in questions that we want to ask in response to that too. But otherwise, the recommendation is what's in stream is in stream. We might have to adjust timelines, but we keep going, and then we work to accommodate the mandate of the province. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Councillor Van Valk and then Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I just had a question of interest. In the housing needs reports, what exactly does that entail? Like, how do we determine what the need is and who needs it and how much we need?
Mr. Seale.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Vander Valk. So the province has forecasted that they're going to be specifying exactly how those housing needs reports were done. So the last time that they were done, they provided absolutely no policy direction. So every municipality and/or regional district did them in a slightly different way. The way that the regional district of Nanaimo approached it was they hired a consultant, qualified in the kind of demographic and housing needs assessments, and that consultant developed forecasts, based on existing population growth, building permit supply, and various other factors. So that was done at the regional level last time. The last housing report probably won't meet the standards for the next revisions of the housing needs assessment. So the way it's done will change. Councillor Vander Valk and anyone else who's interested, I can certainly provide a link to that previous housing needs assessment. Just bear in mind that that's probably not what will need to be done moving forward.
Go ahead.
And I have another question. What will happen to all of this if the NDP is not voted in again?
We'll leave that to your imagination. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I'm sure outside of a council meeting, there's a lot of speculation we could have. It'd be an interesting conversation. In terms of the housing needs assessments, I actually know someone who used to work for the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, who's now working for a consultancy, and there is a lot of back and forth with the consultants to actually ensure that there are clear criteria. I'm not sure the province has updated that. When we did our housing needs assessment, they just started it. So there was a little bit of back and forth between the province and staff, but it was pretty loose. And I think there's also, too, from the provincial side, some lessons learned from the last round, because I'm not sure the level of quality was necessarily there to really get a sense of how many homes do we really need. It was more, we think maybe that you'll have this many people, and here's some backward-looking data. So I do think it's a fair question to sort out what is the methodology and have that something that we're aware of. But again, just to go back to the point, and I think maybe I didn't express it clearly, my fundamental point is that we don't know what the future holds, and if there's a wonderful opportunity for the town, then we'd have to basically rescind this if there's a new opportunity that we're not aware of that comes up in the next few years. And the only other point I have with this too is that 2027 is the next council's term. So essentially we'd also be deciding that for the next council as well, for a small portion of their term.
Thank you. One of the things I picked up on from the minister's statements that to justify what they're doing is that we have people who can't even find a place in their own community. And I got some information from Parksville where they've had a huge building boom, basically, right at the entrance when you come in by the new food store and by the urgent care facility and all that. And apparently only 10% are from the local community. They're from other parts of the province or other parts of Canada. So for the minister to say we need to build housing for our community, yes, and I agree. That's why we're doing the Kiwanis project. So people who work in this town but don't get paid enough to pay the rent or buy a house will find some way to accommodate them because we think they are deserving of a place in our community. And there are other places where we are considering that near the airport. But for us to plan for how many people want to come from Ontario, we'll never build enough. Or let alone from Alberta. I talk to people who come from there. I'm going to the Newcomers Club next week. And they're all from other parts of the country where they think Qualicum Beach or the Vancouver, East Coast of Vancouver Island is great with climate and recreational facilities and opportunities. So we're not building for our own community. We're building for the rest of Canada, it seems. And the minister thinks they can all get squeezed into the East Coast of Vancouver Island. And I think we have to say, this is what we can accommodate. That number, 12,000, was never a cap. What we did through staff, okay, if the zoning that we have within our urban containment boundary, not counting the ALR, but the kind of services that we can provide within those zoning, how many people could we possibly accommodate? And that number was roughly, at one time, 11,000. Then because we approved secondary suites all over town, we raised that to 12,000. So we made adjustments, but it was never a cap. It was just planning for our engineering department. What do they need to plan for water and sewer and transportation and all that kind of thing? So it was a target for us to plan within. To have this thing thrown at us, and it's not just for our community, it's for whoever wants to move here. I don't know how we can manage that, except by taking a proactive approach, like Councillor Vander said. We need to be proactive and say, there are other places on the East Coast of Vancouver Island, like I mentioned. There are 3 areas, what they used to call nodes or village centers. Develop those. At one time, they had an opportunity, and in the Bowser area, they got a $10 million grant to build a treatment plant like we have at French Creek. They turned it down. Don't want it. Well, so you can't all squeeze into Qualicum Beach. I think Qualicum Beach is a wonderful community that had a great planning all along, in my opinion, and they could take a copy and say that to Bowser or the Lighthouse community or other places like that. So I've talked to the minister about these things, but they have their own thinking. And if you come from a big city, like most of these politicians that we now have telling us what to do come from, they don't understand what it's like to live in a small town where you have limited resources. So tomorrow I'll try and explain that if I get a chance to speak to the minister, what I feel about this. And I think council seems to be in agreement that there's only so much that we as a small town can do to accommodate everybody that wants to move here from the rest of the country. So I think this is reasonable. And thank you for clarifying, Ms. Vella. Ms. Vella, you have some more to clarify?
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to clarify, there was a comment made about strategic planning and the end of council's term. So again, we bring strategic planning to council annually, and you can make adjustments every year. We could see a different announcement next year that, again, we have to respond to. So I think it's that idea that every year we come back, we ask council to reaffirm their focus areas, to reconfirm your strategic plan, per se, and then to approve the initiatives through the budget process. So you do have this annual discussion, even though this date is past the end of council term.
Yes, and I appreciate that this was written as a result of what we heard last week, but that can change and we should be flexible. Councillor Harrison.
I entirely agree, which is why I don't support this resolution, because it includes precisely that conversation in strategic planning. We cannot introduce a new objective moving forward until 2027 if we adopt this. So that's why I think this resolution is actually inappropriate. I think we should absolutely have those hard conversations in the strategic planning process. Absolutely, and be very clear too. One thing I would say we haven't done well as a town all the time is members of council, myself included, come up with a bright idea, and staff say, okay, we can do that, instead of saying, okay, what are you taking off? And I think those conversations need to happen more frequently. But again, the problem is things happen where, forgive me, not to do what Councillor Vander just did, I think the federal government might change soon. And when you have a new government, they usually want to spend money in different areas. And there might be opportunities in a 1.5 to 2 years' time that we're not aware of. So that's just why I don't support this, is because I think we already do that through strategic planning. And so there's no need to bind our hands prior to actually going into that process.
Ms. Brunel.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff will take direction from council. This piece of the resolution is included in the PowerPoint that you'll be presented with on Friday. The hard reality is we simply can't continue business as usual. We don't have the staff. We don't have the resources. The implication for multiple departments, including operations, we have to consider resourcing for that as well as planning. You saw the list of documents that we're going to have to consider. Those don't all fall within planning, but that's exactly it. Council has to wrestle with this, and we have to meet the obligations of the province while maintaining all those other competing requirements. So it'll be a good discussion on Friday, and we welcome council's direction on this.
Thank you. The word in the paragraph says that should be delayed. That is not an edict. That sounds to me like if there is something that we really need to look at, we can. Staff is not saying this is now carved in stone, that's it. If there's something that comes up that we should discuss, I think we will do that. So I'm happy to accommodate staff saying we've got a lot of work coming at us. We can't keep doing business the way we are. We have to take a closer look. And I think council and staff know that if something comes up that really needs to be addressed, this is not going to prevent that. Councillor Harrison.
Just to point out, I'm reading the resolution and I don't see the word should anywhere.
Yeah, right in the second sentence.
Yeah, so no, and further that all strategic initiatives related to land use planning not already in progress be deferred to 2027 or beyond with the exception of qualified survey. And so it basically creates that it will be delayed. Like it's not something that may be delayed. If you want to have may instead of should, fine. Thou shalt, should. It's a conjugation. So, you know, I actually think that the flexibility we're looking for is not actually reflected in the resolution. And I'm going to pull rank here. This is where I actually have educational background. This is my degree. So, yeah, I just think if we want to change that, then we should change the operative verbs to something which includes flexibility, not the ones we currently have, which precludes that.
Well, I've got letters behind my name too. It's MACDP, middle-aged Dutch-Canadian person. And I can see common sense in this. When we talk about all the things that has to happen that we just saw from Mr. Sales, I can understand why staff is saying, look, there's only so many of us, and we got all these other things already in the works. Can we at least give us a breather? And I think that's what this is. This can change. As Mr. Morales said, we review our strategic plan every year. If something comes up that really needs to be addressed, I'm sure staff are not going to say, nope, you said we're not going to do that. If something will come up, we have common sense, and that's why I'm talking about my letters behind my name. It's common sense. And staff is just saying, this is a huge thing that the province has dumped on us, and we're going to have to adjust what we do. And to rely on consultants who are going to be sought after in a very high degree, because every community is going to be struggling with this. So I think we need to take a breather, and if it changes when we review our strategic plan, we can make those changes. But at this point, we're just saying pause. We need to take a look at what's coming down the pike. So further discussion. Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah, I don't think I will be supporting this one at this time. I hear the message loud and clearly. Like I think I understand, and I couldn't pinky swear that I'll try not to bring anything forward. But I just don't think that this is necessary to say that we just won't do it. I tend to agree with Councillor Harrison on this. It could preclude something, and we don't know what that would look like or whatever. So I think I will commit to not doing it personally, but I'm not prepared to vote in favor of this motion at this time. Because we haven't heard or read the manual or the policy exactly, so we don't know everything at this point.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ready for the question on that? Sorry?
Sorry, I didn't have a mover and seconder.
Oh, we haven't been moved and seconded.
No.
For that third paragraph, could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Vander Valk, I'll second it. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Opposed, Councillor Harrison, Skipsey, and Young. Motion is defeated. Thank you. So that was the beginning of my report. Now it actually started. We had some interesting board meetings. Yesterday, actually, the chair, Director Vanessa Craig, got acclaimed for a second year, and vice chair is Stuart McLean from the Bowser area H. We're also looking at the Regional District Financial Plan. The average tax increase based on the average value in Qualicum Beach for their home, about $960,000, will be $48. It would have been more, and I didn't agree with this, but we're not putting any money into the reserves for the swimming pool, which I think is a mistake. But the reason for that is because they want to see or find out whether Parksville will be hosting another regional district pool. This has not been a good situation for us. There was a plan by the previous board to go ahead with the addition to the pool, which at that time was roughly estimated to cost about $10 million. That would cost at least $20 million now. For Parksville to build a pool will be, or not for Parksville, for the regional district to build a pool, which probably be somewhere between 70 and 80 million. That has to go to referendum. They've got so many other things at the regional district, and we pay a portion of the cost of all the capital projects that the Regional District Hospital Board comes up with, and I agree with those. We got a new announcement for a long-term care facility that's about $300 million. Cancer clinic, we're looking in the long term for a new patient tower because the conditions in the hospital are not acceptable, and with this new growth incentive and push, that hospital is going to be swamped, and that to build a new tower, we're probably looking at $1 billion. So to then add a pool, I think people are going to have probably not too excited about doing that at the same time. So I also want to thank staff for our Halloween event. I think we had about 1,200 kids that come and picked up a juice pack at the town here. So thanks staff for organizing that, and for Councillor Skipsey, Vander, Valk, and Young to help hand out those boxes. I also, as you see, have a poppy that I received on October 27th, but the scuttlebutt is that not as many people that normally are, people don't buy as many poppies anymore, especially young people, which is a concern. The money they raised is to help veterans and their families to provide the services that they need. So the poppy is important. It's a good symbol, but also for a fundraiser for the Legion. Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. There's a lot of workshops that were happening. We touched on some of it by the food production. I was at a workshop where people who work with farmers markets and actually farmers, and they were looking for a place where they could meet and have kind of like a mini conference or a workshop somewhere in the area. So on your behalf, I offered to come to Qualicum Beach. If they want to talk about food production, we would provide a space for them to meet and even have coffee for them, because I think they are critical to our environment and to our future to have be less dependent on food being imported from off the island. So food security was a big part of that. Then Councillor Young and I attended the Ducks Unlimited fundraising dinner. I think they're in their 80th year, and they're raising money, and there's members in the gallery who were there as well. It was a great event, and it's a very good cause because they are looking at buying more and more wetlands, which we need for our environment as well. And then I've asked for, I'm presenting a motion to the board to help pay for the mortgage of the Aerosmith Search and Rescue building. They are volunteers. It's on town land. We didn't charge them for that. I don't even think we charged DCCs to have it built. But they're about $188,000 short, including, I believe, interest. And there was a story on the Czech TV where members of the search and rescue were telling that they were in a search, but they also had a commitment to do a fundraiser. And I thought, this is not right. We should pay that building off. So if the motion at the RDN passes, and I've got good feedback from several members of the board, then the town's share would be $12,900 for 3 years. It would take 3 years to pay it off at roughly $70,000 a year, and that would take effect next year. So I thought that was a marginal amount, but I think it's a good message to the search and rescue, who are all volunteers, to pay off that building. That concludes my report. Councillor Harrison.
All right, and yeah, I actually agree with that. in terms of things that are relatively recent, I didn't put forward a motion because I wasn't sure what council wanted to do. So we had a meeting for the accessibility team where the Spark grant came up that we spoke about in the public portion of a meeting a few days back. So there was more clarity provided in terms of what that Spark grant requires. And basically what it requires is 2 letters of support, in essence. One from the town and one from the accessibility team. And there, I was a bit surprised, but I sort of understand where people are coming from. There's a bit of a reticence from the accessibility team to immediately commit to that grant, because their fear is that it looks like it's a one-time grant. So they weren't sure if there would be subsequent funding available for accessibility initiatives in the town. And so as a result, they were a little bit reticent to say, let's commit our one shot at this to this one project. But there was a bit of a sense that if there's stable funding moving forward for infrastructure, they feel more comfortable signing off on that. So I talked to some of the folks who involved with QBQs. I believe he said he'd contact you as well, so I'm assuming you're up to speed on that. I'm assuming he did. Okay, my apologies. But, you know, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe that's better. Okay, so I'm not sure how we approach it. So QBQs is in a situation where they have the brain body fitness. It needs roughly $25,000 to continue operation. They didn't get a clear sense of exactly how long that $25,000 would last. But the idea is that it would be several months, quite some time, maybe a year. So there's basically 3 options that I could see. One is that council, if we choose, we could provide the funds directly, but then that money has to come from somewhere. And we don't want to be too hasty with that. 2, I also discussed with the gentleman from QBQ's bridge funding. So we don't pay the whole amount. We pay enough money so that you can line up funding streams over the next few months. Because right now they're sort of in this position where their fundings, I think, run out, and they're trying to hold on to the workers. The 3rd option is that we do a resolution just saying that it's likely ongoing funding for accessibility will be provided, but we don't have information yet. Like, that's obviously a budget decision. But there's a desire to provide some form of ongoing support. So those are sort of like the 3 options. I would hate to see the brain body fitness fall apart after so many years of trying to get it going, and it's actually creating a lot of positive benefits. And full background, I spent 2 years doing living care for folks with disabilities. So I've seen firsthand what good quality care can do to improve someone's quality of life. So I don't know how to really put it to council. I think there are really 3 options on the table and what council feels most comfortable with.
Thank you. To staff, what would be your recommendation on how to proceed with, obviously there's a desire from, I think, all of council to see the brain body fitness program continue. How do we best deal with this request for funding? I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm looking for advice. We are looking for advice.
I think we have to consider the scope of the ask. Is it something that requires a staff report? Does it require a scoping sheet? It's difficult to just answer on the fly, Your Worship. So if you'd like to refer the matter to staff.
I think that would be appropriate. So the motion to defer the request.
Oh,
from Spark?
absolutely. So there's no motion per se,
Okay.
but maybe just a brief note about that. But yeah, that was just sort of where the committee was sort of stuck on this idea of if there's no ongoing funding, we're just doing grants, and there's no clear indication that there are multiple grants forthcoming. I did sort of mention too, though, that there are multiple ways to fund accessible infrastructure. It's not just through the Spark program. So generic infrastructure grants could fund accessible infrastructure, in theory, if that's something we wanted to do. But there was still just that reticence. So I'm not sure how the vote would go because it has to come from the team. It is actually in the grant that they have to provide that letter. So rather than put everyone on the spot and have a yes or no vote and suddenly it falls apart and there's a lot of ill will, I just wanted to try to see if we could smooth that out in the meantime. Also attended VIEA. What I found shocking was the least attended one was one on using technology to fight wildfires. I thought there'd be a ton of people. They had a really big room and no one showed up. But there's also one that right after that ended was really interesting. John Jack, who I quite admire. He's the elected chief for the Houaiit Nation, and he was on a panel on indigenous relations to the forestry sector, which was very interesting. I saw the mayor in the room. I think you might have attended the whole thing. That was really, actually, I think VIA is a really great event. And they also provide sort of an economic analysis of the whole island, which I think is really helpful. And I don't think it's available to the public, but it'd be a good thing to make sure that we have somewhere for council that just if we want to refer to it, we can. Beyond that, yeah, the accessibility team, there's a few things we'd sort of discussed. The questions are, we have basically a what we heard report from the public outreach. We did a good job of that, actually, relative to other communities. I think we did better than most. And the question is really, how do you move from here's what we heard to how do you create a system to prioritize projects? And the concern is from some of the members is we want to make sure that there's transparency about how we're deciding which projects get funded first. It's not just sort of, I feel this one, okay, we'll do that one. But there's a sort of a criteria that's transparent, the public can see it and they understand, okay, this is why. Just because obviously there's not enough money to do everything all at once or even over a couple of years. It's going to take a long time. Beyond that, a few other things. Just a few other things that I was sort of dealing with, which have no relation to council, but I was looking at the housing regulation, and I don't know if we want to do a motion where we reach out to the province and ask them about have they done any work looking at carrying capacity? So we can talk about like sewer, you can build more sewage capacity. It's very expensive, but it's doable. But water, there's a finite amount. So water in particular, after a certain point, you're actually damaging the water itself, the availability of water in the aquifer. So I was just curious if the province, I don't think it needs to be a resolution, but maybe just for staff to follow up when they're talking to the provincial counterparts, the extent to which carrying capacity has been considered in the legislation. Because I did at VIA talk to a provincial staff person who mentioned that she works within the water. There's all these new ministries, and I forget the name, my apologies, but they deal with the water. It's been centralized into one ministry now. And so sometimes there are conflicts between the desire to see a certain number of building permits, and then the ministry comes back and says, actually, you don't have the water capacity to do that. You don't get all those building permits. So I just think maybe if it would be appropriate for Mr. Sales or someone else on staff, just when they're discussing this legislation, as there's a lot to discuss, really focus on that one question of how much has the province looked at this? And there's a coordination between the Ministry of Housing and the ministry that deals with water in particular. As a lot of those other issues, housing, sewer, policing, that's unfortunately solved through higher taxes. But there are some resources which are finite. And once we run out of them, there's no real replacement that's immediately at hand. Beyond that, the last thing is last night we had the Eagle Crest Residents Association, AGM. So I did a brief Q&A. To Mr. Sales' point, I talked about the housing legislation as the most consequential legislation on housing in the 21st century in BC, easily. So it's a big deal. There were a lot of questions about the golf course, some concerns. Someone from the golf course was there, and they did note that they're trying their best. One issue that some neighbors have talked about are the number of folks who walk their dog. And so when technically it's private property, technically you shouldn't be walking your dog there, but it looks like a park. And so a lot of people just show up. And so one citizen in particular sort of told some people, unfortunately, you can't walk your dog here. And then people get very upset. Well, actually, I can. Who are you to tell me? And it's caused a bit of conflict. But the staff did clarify they're trying to manage that. And I understand they can't have 6 people standing around at every entrance, crossing their arms and shaking their heads at dog owners. It doesn't work. But it is something that some of the neighbors are getting a little bit concerned about, the sheer volume. The number I heard from one citizen was over 100 in a day. And they're not all at once, but there's a large number. So it's just something when we're looking at the golf course, I'm not sure how we work with them with that, but it was one concern. And beyond that, I think that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. Okay, so in response to the delegation at the last meeting, I put forward this notice of motion. I'll read the resolved part, that the request by the Friends of the Qualicum Beach Forest for a celebration of National Tree Day in September 2024 be supported with staff resources for joint coordination, including provision of letters of support for any grants which may be applied for, as well as a small budget of up to $5,000 for the event. And so staff had commented that they weren't sure what the details on were for staff resources that would be required for the event. So I did forward a few examples of tree celebrations in other communities. It would be mostly just working with the volunteers to pull off some kind of event. I sort of envision almost like what was done in the past with Earth Day. Some of the longtime residents might remember that, or some kind of celebration anyways, acknowledging trees, and also providing education. It was pointed out to me that our climate change adaptation plan talks a lot about planting trees and whatnot, so this is in line with that. The $5,000 was meant to be sort of a buffer, so that the money could be used if other funding wasn't found. But I would expect we're quite a ways out from this event, so there would be an opportunity to look for some other grants. So I guess I would, with that background. And I think also the question was whether it would be a one-time or a future ongoing event. And I think for now it would be a one-time ask, and if it is deemed to be successful, maybe there are other ways to make it happen going forward. So I would move the recommendation.
Thank you. As a seconder, Councillor Harrison. So you pinky swore that you wouldn't bring new things to staff.
This was already in progress.
Okay. All right, further discussion. Councillor Harrison.
No, I think this is pretty reasonable, and if there's a smaller sort of ceremony, I could see in my head of planting a few indigenous trees, maybe that are vulnerable. It might be actually a very useful thing. Councillor Skipsey mentioned an arbutus tree was cut down, and if you had a ceremony sort of replace that tree, the new one, I think that'd be quite lovely. Obviously, we don't want to take up too much staff time, but I think the volunteers will really take the lead on this one. And then I think moving forward, hopefully this can be something where they can just do some community fundraising, because it's not a huge amount of money at the end of the day.
Okay, and the motion is up to 5,000. So further discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Proceed, Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, and then I had another notice of motion. This one came out of the last Parks and Recreation Committee meeting. There was a roundtable where there was a discussion, a suggestion about, where is culture, arts and culture covered off. So the motion is that arts and culture be considered for addition to an existing select committee or as a new advisory body to council during the upcoming committee review, and staff say that the second phase of the committee review in 2024 could address this. So I would like to move that recommendation.
By Councillor Young. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I'll just mention a few of the things I've been up to. October 11th, I was at the Qualicum Beach Memorial Golf Course for their monthly board meeting. The 12th was the RDN Solid Waste Committee meeting. October 25th, I attended the Qualicum Beach Seniors Activities Center's AGM on behalf of the mayor. It was a very good turnout, and I will mention that there was some discussion around needing a larger space. So that's just a heads up to council. That could be a discussion going forward. October 31st, we had fun handing out the juice boxes, as the mayor mentioned. I just wanted to thank the staff for organizing this, and particularly the parks staff. I don't know if everybody had the opportunity to see, but they transformed our square out there to a spooky graveyard, and we received many compliments on a job well done, so I would like to pass those along. And then later that evening, I attended the viewing of Ants at the Qualicum Beach Museum, which starred Suzanne Summers. I don't know if people are aware of that. It was filmed at the old College Inn. So it was really fun seeing the old shots of the beach as they drove along and the hotel. And then later that evening was the last of the QB Reads series, was John Beaton did a poetry reading, and it was very well done. November 1st, Councillor Vander, Valk, and I had 2 grade 9 students come to work with us at the town hall. So they sort of job shadowed, and it was a great opportunity for us to let the young people know about the diversity of work that's available in local government. And we really appreciated staff taking a few minutes out of their day to tell us a little bit about what they do and what kind of skills and background they have. And I think the highlight, of course, for the students was meeting the mayor and wearing the chain of office and having their photos taken. So thank you to everybody who supported that. November 2nd, I attended the Heritage Forest Commission meeting and the Field of Crosses ceremony, along with other members of council. November 6th and 7th were the committees of the whole for the airport, and I thought it was very well done, and I think our residents appreciated the opportunity to be heard, so I'd like to thank staff for organizing these and facilitating those sessions. And I just wanted to finish my report by asking staff for an update on the Beach Creek viewing platform. Recently, there was a message that came out about additional funding. But every time I see these updates about more grant money received, the project costs seem to be growing. So originally, it was $1.68 million. That was turned down by council. We didn't want to proceed because we thought that was a high cost. And then it came back saying, wait, there's grants available. So we reconsidered it. We've been applying for grants, but it's now, according to the last message, it said over $3 million. So I don't know if that's for the whole project, or if we could get some more information, it would be appreciated.
Yes, staff will provide a memo regarding this. And I also need a motion. I know we approved it before to apply for a grant from the Island Economic Trust. We were denied the last time because, well, first of all, the province hadn't indicated they would provide another $10 million for the whole program. And so the money was tight, and it appeared at that time that the town wasn't going to be paying much as far as the cost because it was paid for by other grants. So I need an official motion, and we can do that in December, to apply for grant funding through the IST. And at that time, I think December 6th would be a reasonable time to provide a memo. Thank you. Ms.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we can add that to the planning memo content, because my hopes is, because it's a cross-department project again, that we can bring it back with project milestones, council resolution, funding, and actually present it in a way that's not an Excel table. So it's not a simple explanation, which is why I suggested the memo. So we'll add the IST discussion to that, and thank you.
Thank you. That was your complete your report. Thank you. Councillor Vander.
Thank you. On October the 12th, I attended the information open house for a development proposal at Beach and First Avenue. On October the 16th, 23rd, 30th, and November 6th, I attended meetings with the OCP Review Steering Committee. On October the 16th, I attended the St. Andrew's Lodge Historical, I'll call it Sal Hacks. I always get it mixed up, their board meeting. October 20th, I attended the Qualicum Beach Chamber of Commerce board meeting at 7:30 in the morning, I might add. October 23rd, I attended the town's public open house, and with Councillor Young, and among the topics included were discussions about better sound recordings of the committee meetings, the bus garage site survey, the state of the business community, the RDN growth plan of nodes of communities, questioning, as Mayor Westbrook did, why can't we go in that direction? Pheasant Glen and short-term rentals, accommodation of electric vehicles and pedestrian traffic. The TOSH, changes at TOSH, and how to better encourage residents to attend the town's open houses. On October 25th and 26th, I attended via the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. For those of you that are like me and don't necessarily understand what all of these abbreviations are representing, in Nanaimo, and I participated in the workshops discussing food security and community development. And as Mayor Westbrook indicated, there was a lot of concern around food security and how we can increase that on Vancouver Island so that we're not so dependent on importing food from all over the world, actually. October 31st, I attended the Chartwell Residents Association board meeting, and after that attended the Halloween celebrations with Councillor Skipsey and Mayor Westbrook, and enjoyed seeing the costumes and enthusiasm of the trick-or-treatsters. And as Councillor Skipsey mentioned, on November 1st, we hosted 2 KSS grade 9 students, and that was actually quite informative for me as well. It gave me an opportunity to talk to other staff members and find out more about their background, and it was an interesting day all around. I hope the students found it interesting as well. And November 2nd, I attended the dedication ceremony for the Field of Crosses in Qualicum Beach, and then attended the AGM of 4VI, which is essentially, they have changed over to it's a tourism association, but looking at sustainability and more the social aspects of tourism as well. And on November the 6th, I attended the Chartwell Residents Association AGM, where Shajini Mehta, the town's new climate action and emergency program coordinator, gave an informative presentation, and I would suggest that other residents associations may be interested in having her meet with them as well. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Vander Valk. Councillor Young.
I attended the ALCO Zoom meeting, which ALCO oversees the Into the Woods daycare, and they already have, for a new daycare, they already have a waiting list of 72 people that want to, kids that want to get on. So they're asking, like, we need to build more daycares in our community. Also attended the museum board meeting, did the public open house of Councillor Vander Valk. Attended also the East Village open house presentation by Callan Ventures. They believe their development will be available for moving in 2025, and they're suggesting there'll be 50 units for people to move into. Also attended the museum AGM. I also, along with the rest of council, attended the Vancouver Island Economic Summit. Also came back and attended the Oceanside Hospice Board meeting. I enjoyed Halloween as well. Attended the Legion Poppy ceremony, the Streamkeepers AGM, the Field of Crosses ceremonies, the Ducks Unlimited Gala fundraiser, the Tosh Music Night featuring a Grammy Award-winning duo, and also both of the airport public meetings. In mentioning all this, many of these are nonprofit organizations, and this being the holiday season, I'd like to suggest that, you know, for holiday gift giving, that we support some of these nonprofit organizations, and that's shopping local. These nonprofit organizations provide a lot of services and amenities for us. For instance, the museum, Tosh, the Legion also needs our support always, and that's so important. And also like Ducks Unlimited to save our environment. many of these nonprofit organizations that are here locally. And then also, like, on the top of the list too, because we are always needing nurse practitioners and doctors in our area, I'd also say let's extend support to the Flowerstone Health Society by making a donation for Christmas. Instead of gift giving, you shop local and you make a donation to these organizations for your friends or for your family members and say, I put some money in, with your name towards supporting this wonderful cause. So just want to mention that. And there are some of these Flowerstone pamphlets for there to pick up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Harrison?
Sorry, I neglected to mention, just because we skipped over the correspondence log and was supposed to do in the report, I forgot that there's one point I wanted to make about the leaded gas earlier.
Sure.
If that's okay. So just, there's some research I did in the previous weeks where you can actually go online, look at federal reports as to why there's a small amount of lead in the gasoline for aviation fuel. And it's basically about the older engines where they've tried alternatives and they actually cause the engine to fail. So at this point, it's basically for the older engines. We have a lot of general aviation. That's why. There are health reports. The last one was done in 2014. So folks want a copy of that, I can just send me an email and I can send you the copy of that report from the federal government. And if people want the government to take a second look at that, our MP is a very strong advocate for the community, and I'm sure he'd be willing to speak up for that.
Thank you. Staff reports. Who starts with that? Ms. Barilla? Okay. Ms. Winson?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So I'll just wait for Ms. Gould to load up the presentation. I'm doing the communications strategy update. Thank you. See if my clicker works here. No, it does not, so I'll let you advance. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So to give an update on the communication strategy for the upcoming year, so the guiding principles are before you on this slide, and we will put this slide deck onto the website as well. But in developing this strategy, we took into account these guiding principles, including how two-way communication occurs between the town and residents, and how are residents accessing essential and timely information that impacts their lives in Qualicum Beach. So opportunities for residents to engage in the civic programs that are being offered and staying involved with the town council and what's happening within the town itself, and planning ahead for the town's communication needs so you can be prepared and be proactive in communication. Next slide. So our 2022-2023 successes and building on our last year's strategy. So next slide. So we started the year with a full internal audit of our communications channels, and there were many one-on-one conversations with staff, mayor and council, which highlighted the needs for stronger internal processes and better flow of information. So knowing this, we set out and achieved 3 objectives that we aimed on strengthening communications by focusing our internal processes and how we respond to the public. So we mapped all the ways the public reach is through the town and through questions, complaints, and we were able to update our media protocol, our media lists for issuing information across the province, and we have developed templates for sharing information on important items with mayor and council. Next slide. So the progress report for the communication strategy, goal number 2 was to improve access to information for residents of Qualicum Beach and build trust and encourage greater engagement within the town. We set out to improve and optimize the communication channels. So to ensure that we communicate consistently and in a timely manner, we created an annual content plan and a social media posting plan. This allowed us to work ahead and get essential information out to all residents through our communication channels. We've enforced a language of behavior policy to ensure that all social media is welcoming and respectful for all users. And we've added an accessibility app to the town's website for inclusive access to information for all site visitors. And we've recently worked on that with the Accessibility Committee as well to see if there's ways in improving. I don't know if anybody's accessed it on the website, but there's an accessibility function on the bottom where you can, some people with accessibility issues would like to read the information with a black screen on the background and the lettering in white, for example, or they need it larger. So there's many options now for accessibility on the website, and we'll continue to improve that with our website. Next slide. Sorry. So the goal number 2 for Facebook. So you can see that the numbers, the highlights for 2023, the Facebook page has significantly increased its follower count. This shows effective audience growth and community engagement efforts. So the page reach has seen a substantial boost from 202 in 2022 to nearly 1,000 in 2023. This indicates that the content is reaching a larger audience and achieving a 100% response rate to messages in 2023, up from 40%. It also demonstrates an excellent commitment to engaging with the community and addressing inquiries, which is something we'll continue to strive to improve on. This page is now posting more consistently and sharing other important community posts, which helps maintain audience engagement. And that can be items like when we post. So we receive information from the consultant that there's better times during the week to post, better times of the day to post. So we can schedule those posts in advance when we know things are coming up and try and get the best outreach we can and not have duplicate posts. So we had many departments that were posting, not knowing that each other were posting, so there would be 3 posts in one day from various departments. So we've eliminated that now, and we have a schedule so that the posts are more effective. So the top performing posts in 2023 have achieved remarkable engagement levels, and these posts include photos of real people, relevant education content, and community-related information. And videos were also, whenever we would post a live video to say, come on down, we had really good success and outreach with that, so we're going to work to improve on that in the coming year. Next was the Constant Contact. So Constant Contact already had an impressive performance, so we just wanted to make sure there were some small changes to see if we could increase that. So we removed any outdated lists that were being sent. We created a new catch-all list for news releases and important information called Qualicum Headlines. Open was already very, very high with double the industry standard, and we still increased that. And we also made some changes to make it easier for members of the public to find the information they were looking for. We started including hyperlinks to our council agendas, items in our emails. Thank you, Wesley. Previously had to scroll through 300 pages, for example, of an agenda to find what you wanted, and now residents can simply go and click directly to the link for what the item that they're looking for. So we receive really good feedback on that improvement. So we are listening and want to hear from people. Next slide. So YouTube, we had organized the town's YouTube videos, creating playlists so it's easier for residents to find council meetings. You'll see that there's tiles on the website where you can click and go straight to the council meeting. We timestamp the videos again for viewers so they can skip the issues that they aren't interested and go directly to what they're interested in seeing. And we now promote the videos with more actively through our other channels. So goal number 3, our goal here is to help people who may want to participate but aren't sure how. So learn how to get involved with the civic process. We've created this goal last year and we'll continue to work on it this year with the enhancement of the website. So council strategic planning, for example, is being done again in open meeting. Public are invited to listen and speak to council and voice their thoughts and opinions, and we'll be doing the strategic planning sessions in council chamber this year, listening to the feedback last year that it was the audio for microphones was hard to hear for people in the audience, so we've moved it to the council chamber for this year. And that starts on Friday for those that are interested. So next slide. So 2023-24 are our strategies. Next one. So here our goal number 1 is, as you know, communication is a two-way street, and the town receives hundreds of emails, phone calls, drop-ins, and letters every month from the public. And on the other side, we're responsible for keeping the public informed. and engaged on items that impact the lives of Qualicum Beach. So we will continue to build and work on what we did last year and continue to make further improvements for communication with our residents. So we have two objectives to achieve this year, and the first is to look internally at where can we streamline and strengthen how information is shared out. And the second objective is to make it easier for the public to get the information they need. So we're exploring a number of options, including a new town website. So currently we have a request for proposals out right now. We're receiving applications and we'll be closing that off in December. And that overhaul and building of a new website is a very extensive process, which will take well into all of 2024 and probably into even some of 2025. But we're really excited to be able to get a new platform and listen to our residents and see how we can make that easier for everybody. Next slide. So the next goal is to improve digital communications. As we already have reviewed, we've made some excellent progress in optimizing our digital communications. And goal number 2 is we want to continue to build on that into 2024. Okay, so looking at our audience who engage with the town regularly, we know who we're able to communicate with, but we want to explore other audiences and ensure that we're reaching a broader demographic in Qualicum Beach, and that includes youth and young families. So council's already directed staff to make options, for example, for meetings to be held alternating, so some in the day and some in the evening, again, trying to see if that affects getting inclusion of younger families or people that may be working. We also want to ensure our efforts to improve our digital communication channels like Facebook. We don't want that to be remain static. We'll continue to build on the work from last year and see where we can improve that broader outreach. And one of the largest projects, again, will be invested is to modernize the town's website, which I've alluded to, and just that functionality and access both on desktops and when you're accessing the website on your cell phone. So we would like to generate a proactive communications process and improve issues management. And with the strategic planning and budget work that's happened previously, we're better able to understand and able to access the annual communication needs across various departments. We'll create a communications calendar for the whole organization, again, so we're not cross-posting. So we're going to do that ahead of the time. So we're planning now to have all of 2024. Each department will put in their standard, all the special events that we already know we do, water main flushing, tree chipping, all the different aspects from all the departments will all be put in the communications calendar, integrated into priorities, and then we can ensure that all of that information gets to our residents well in advance of when things are happening, including projects. We receive feedback that we've done a really good job this year to get those projects out to people ahead of time so they know when they're driving down the street. They don't have to say, oh, what's that? They've already received their communication. We'd like to also review how communication process can be integrated and standardized into departments. And so again, we're working with our consultant on that for each department, and this will benefit the town in helping mayor and council and leadership to be informed on complex issues, not just your regular standard issues that happen every year. And with the planning announcement, or the changes to the planning, that will be huge for this year to make sure we're communicating with our residents so there's not misinformation out there. Next slide. So goal number 4, our goal here is to help people who may want to participate again but aren't sure how, or they're intimidated, learn how to on the civic process. So the first step would be to clarify, how does local government work and how do you speak with council or present to council? Some people may not even know that they're permitted to do that. So that's something we're going to work on. We'd like to start an educational content on this topic through maybe some short videos on our website, through social media posts, and building out a web content that's more in depth with that information for the public. Stakeholder and public engagement processes are one of the top ways that residents can participate in forming the future of Qualicum Beach, and we want to review on how we can improve how we communicate these opportunities and why they're important to the community members to participate in. Some people don't want to public speak, but we can encourage them that even if they're writing into council, they're still getting their message heard and added to the log, and then council can pull the information, as we saw today, if there's more information on something. So development of a notification protocol and standardizing notifications and areas is something we'll be enhancing. And that's the end of my presentation. Was there any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Swenson. I have just a slight comment.
Yes.
I think it was the fourth slide where it says Qualicum headlines.
Yes, as soon as I said it. Qualicum Beach, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And several times, the people have asked for an organizational chart. Will that be on the website as well in the future or near future? I know we were waiting to fill all the categories for senior staff to be completed. Not names, but just a function. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the current structure is available in the financial plan, department by department. We do anticipate changing titles to be more reflective of current positions. So we do have some changes to do, and we anticipate a robust organizational chart will be brought forward in Q1 of 2024.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Harrison.
Yes, I just want to appreciate there's a lot of hard work that we've done on that in the last year. But I'm thinking back to my first term in office where we'd get presentations annually from, say, the public health officer, our CMP once a year would do a presentation, our fire chief once a year would do a presentation, and particularly the public health officer with all the things happening in the world these days. I know in the past he'd come and he'd talk about things like vaping for youth and how that leads to health issues or other health issues that are impacting seniors. So I'm just wondering, has there been an opportunity to reach out to some of those sort of, how should I say it, overarching institutions that allow us to advocate to provincial government or federal government? Or is it they just taken a policy that they're just not doing that anymore?
For the provincial, through the chair to Councillor Harrison, through the provincial health officer, they used to request to us to come, so just much like a delegation, so it wasn't us reaching out to them, but if that's something council wishes, we can certainly reach out to them, but they have not contacted us to give a presentation.
And just through the chair, I mean, I just found that very useful when they'd say, here are the health issues in your community that we've seen as a health authority, or the health officer rather, and some of the trends that council might want to be aware of, or the public in general. I just thought that was a very helpful thing. I didn't know, because I've discussed with some people, certain, like VHA used to post data on health outcomes for the Oceanside area. They stopped updating that 5 years ago. And so it's something that I found very useful. Again, you could go back, look at trends over time and say, oh, okay, we have more people getting sick with this, or more people are passing on because of this issue. Yeah, I was just wondering if they had like a policy thing, or if maybe something we could maybe just say, do you want to do this 4 months from now?
I think that's a very good suggestion, that perhaps we would have someone from Island Health talk about what they're planning in our community, not perhaps in Qualicum Beach, but in Oceanside, what they're planning for doctor attraction and retention facilities, the type of services, how things are going with nurse practitioners. I think if we could possibly, and I know we're doing it on the fly, but if we could send an invitation on behalf of council to Island Health, to have someone representing Island Health to talk about our local needs and what services we can expect. I think that would be appropriate. I don't think I need a motion for that, but I think we can invite someone in that capacity. Ms. Varela and I met with Island Health Board representatives during the UBCM, and there were some things that we didn't know and some things that they didn't know. So I think for them to come to us, there's questions about having a mobile facility that goes out to the outer areas to deal, especially for homeless people, to have access to medical services. That was started. I think they have it in Campbell River. I think they have it in Nanaimo now. But we used to do that through Mana Ministry, where they had a van and they would have a nurse or a doctor in the van that could help assess what people might need. So I think having someone invited, and perhaps a motion would be appropriate, that we invite an Island Health representative to talk to us about Island Healthcare Services and what they're planning in the future. So I would make that as a motion, if that's council, if I see lots of nods, if there's people shaking their heads, I won't go there. But Ms. Rilla?
Your worship, could we anticipate that as a 2024 initiative, perhaps
Oh, yeah.
Q1 2024? It would be unrealistic to expect that before the Christmas
Oh, no,
break.
no. We want to have them to have time to prepare a proper presentation. So, but an invitation on the council behalf to invite somebody from Island Health early in the new year would be helpful. Councillor Young?
I've also had requests from local people that have attended the meetings that sometimes they don't attend because they don't have any input at the end of our sessions. Can we bring that back where they can make their comments at the end of our meetings?
I had that request last week from a member of the gallery, and I said, personally, I like it better when people send in their information, and we had on page 83 and 85, I think, there is comments from the gallery in writing. So when in the past, and we've probably remember that, someone come to the microphone, and it's kind of like, okay, I want to make a statement that we can't refute. We're not going to debate it again because the council meeting is over. There's no opportunity to engage during the council meeting, so people who are at home can observe what's going on and write, thinking about what they want to write, and then if it's appropriate language, we will print that. So everybody gets to see that. So I'm personally not in favor of bringing that back, but if council wants to make that decision, we can vote on it. Councillor Harrison.
And just as a cautionary tale, there was a local government example during the pandemic when there's a small town somewhere in BC, I forget which community it was, I think it was in the interior, and they allowed comments prior to the meeting. But what that local government's YouTube did is it imprinted the town logo on every video, the whole video. And so someone came in who had very, very extreme views about vaccination and how it's going to kill you, and Bill Gates is taking over your brain with microchips and all this stuff. And it had the town logo on the video. And so it started spreading around the internet saying the city of so-and-so supports our views on the vaccine. But it wasn't someone from the city, but it spread around on the internet because of that. And so I just sort of caution that when we don't have any sort of filter, sometimes you can get some very strange comments, and then it might be confusion who's making the comment once it hits the internet, because we live in a fact-free internet world now, sadly. So I do think if there were, the only sort of compromise I'd say is if folks had questions for staff, if they want to submit written questions to the meeting, that might be something that it could be a brief response to either during the council meeting. But as far as making those statements live on air, just because of what I've seen recently and the way the world is going, sadly, I'm not saying I'm thrilled with it, but it's just the way it is. I wouldn't support that at this time.
Thank you. Back to the presentation, because that was kind of our focus. We kind of got sidelined. Go ahead.
Your worship, just a note that would require a procedure bylaw amendment. It's a significant undertaking. And I think one of the things the town is doing much better is actually bringing items that the public would like to have discourse on to a committee of the whole. So your procedure bylaw sets those up, and you're seeing that with strategic planning, review of the age-friendly transportation plan. So actually moving that to a forum where public input is encouraged. So I just wanted to point out that that opportunity does exist for any of those big pieces, and council can refer items to a committee of the whole within your procedure bylaw.
Yes, and there's always the opportunity for delegation. All right, on the presentation from Ms. Swenson, anything further to add, Ms. Swenson?
No, but we have a motion on the floor for the referral to Island Health to have them present.
Okay, so let's focus back on that. We got distracted a
Yeah.
little bit, but let's go back.
So I need a
to,
seconder. I have you.
Yeah. So, Ms. Young, Councillor Young is seconding that? Okay.
Thank you.
Discussion, Councillor Harrison?
And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the motion, but it would be great if someone from either the public health officer or VIHA would give an update on what's happening on the ground in terms of healthcare, with some data on things that they're, maybe think we should be aware of. Because I know for myself, one of the best questions I ever asked was of a coroner. And I asked her, how are people dying in our area that we don't talk about, but we should? And she highlighted single older men in rural areas who drink too much. And at the last time we had our data updated, we're talking about the opioid crisis across BC, the rate of alcohol-related mortality. Now, this includes like cirrhosis and people just chronic drinking, but it was triple the opioid crisis. It was some of the highest rates in the province. So that's why I think it's great to have those people, because they can give us information that I would never have thought of. And it could be really beneficial when we're advocating to the province what our community needs.
Thank you. So on a motion to invite someone from Island Health to speak to us about health-related issues, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed to any? Carried. Thank you. Ms. Svensson, that was a very good presentation. Really appreciate all the work that's going in. We've heard so often that council is not being transparent enough, not passing information enough, or how people can get involved or get answers to their questions. I think you've dealt with, if not all of them, certainly most of them. So appreciate that.
I just would like to address Bernadette Ritter upstairs from our communications department, Wesley Gould, and of course our consultant, because it's a team effort for sure. It's definitely, I'm not going to take the credit.
And good for you. And same with Ms. Gould. We have a wonderful staff who will try and, I'll say, can meet all your expectations, but we're trying to cover as many expectations as we can. All right, so that concludes your report. No, we got a couple other things. Go ahead with the next one.
Yeah, so on page 63, there's your report for the, as we were going through the motions index, our apologies, we did not meet the deadline to have the resolution that was adopted by Council June 14th. We missed the June 30th deadline for UBCM, so we have a recommendation that we refer it to AVICC and then that it be referred to UBCM for 2024.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey? No? Yeah. Okay, so it's Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey. Discussion. Councillor Skipsey.
I don't think this is really necessary at this point because there was a similar resolution that went forward to the UBCM board and was adopted. And recently there's been quite a bit of progress in this area around biodiversity, and there's now there was the announcement about federal funding for biodiversity and provincial funding. So now we're more looking at how do we work with the province and to implement some of this, the action that we're looking for in biodiversity. So I think it's more around like the 25 by 25 for the province and 30 by 30 for the federal government. So I appreciate the attempt to kind of fix this, but I don't think it's necessary at this point.
Ms. Varela, and as Councillor Skipsey indicated, we appreciate being details and getting it correct. Is there, obviously you recommend that we do this. Ms. Varela.
Your Worship, it's really a case of the agenda tracker. So every time council gives a resolution, we either need to action it or council needs to rescind it. So I'll defer to the Director of Corporate Services on this.
Thank you. Ms. Svensson.
So hearing that it's not necessary, yes, if we could have a motion to rescind the June 14th, 2023 council resolution, then that shows in the books that it's been rescinded. No action required.
All right. Councillor Vander. Use your microphone, please. Thank you.
I was going to make the motion to rescind.
And that would supersede the motion that's on the floor?
Technically, we'd have to lay on the table.
Yeah, we laid on the table. So it takes a whole process. So why don't you withdraw your motion, and then it's much cleaner and easier. So you withdraw the motion. Councillor Skipsey? Go ahead.
Well, I just wonder if we could, sorry, I'm losing it, not withdraw, but defeat it, just to get rid of it. I'm a little concerned about rescinding it, and then that maybe could be interpreted that maybe we didn't support it any longer, or I don't want it to,
Just a sec.
Sure.
What is the cleanest way to deal with this from staff's perspective? And least amount of work?
I think we should rescind it because the action said to send it to the 2023 UBCM. Well, that's passed. So we've missed that anyways. And so I think we should just rescind it if we're not actioning it. So I think we should withdraw the motion that's on the floor right now, which was Councillor Harrison's motion, and then someone make a motion to rescind.
Okay. So you withdraw the motion?
There's actually another alternative. We can defer indefinitely, and then it disappears into the ether. Under Robert's rules, you're allowed to
We're
defer.
talking about something that happened last year. We're
I
looking
know.
at the future.
I know, this is a bit silly, but
Let's vote on the
just
motion.
procedurally, that's one way.
Councillor Harrison, let's vote on the motion, defeat it, and then rescind it. All in favor? No, we're supposed to defeat it. Opposed? Motion is defeated. Now motion to rescind. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vanderwalk, discussion. All in favor? Carried unanimously. So we are rescinded. Thank you. Christmas market. Let's talk about something happy.
Yes, this is something happy.
Oh, I know we're getting past 2 hours, and I was told in the past at 2 hours we need a break. So would council like a recess? All right, 5-minute recess. Thank you. Quite a while. I don't know. No, I don't think past 3. No, I don't think past 3. I'll call the meeting back to order. Thank you. Christmas night market. Ms. Swenson?
Thank you. So this is a new initiative that has been proposed by the Qualicum Beach Farmers Market. They would like to join in with the Chamber of Commerce for the Thursday, November 23rd Moonlight Madness. And we did receive a letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce agreeing for them to be doing this.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison. I think it's wonderful to have all these different groups working together. I think that's getting into the Christmas mode just by doing that. So it's been moved and seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Ms. Smith.
And next is the actual Moonlight Madness Road closure for Primrose. So as we've done in the past, closing Primrose from 1st Avenue to 2nd Avenue, and we'll be participating lighting up Glassford Square.
We have a motion to staff recommendation. Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Special event holiday light display.
Yeah, so this is the last one. This is the Qualicum Beach Collective. They've done this before where they partner with Milner Gardens and they put a sleigh at the end of the Clock Tower Square on Memorial Avenue, also starting on November 23rd.
Have a motion to that effect. Councillor Vander, Councillor Harrison. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Planning. Mr. Seals.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Next item under planning is a report on some of the major projects that are underway. If you could just pull up my slides. So as we discussed earlier this meeting, many of the strategic initiatives will be deferred. However, some are in progress. And so just wanted to take this opportunity to provide council and the public with an update on those projects and an overview of next steps. So the first big project underway is Saahtlam Park. There's a design process that has been underway for a number of months. Consultation was primarily online. There were a number of surveys. There was also an on-site meeting with a number of interest groups, including Qualicum First Nation, the Society, and some other local groups. So based on the input that the consultant has received, they've developed a draft plan that's kind of a refinement of the previous conceptual plan that was done a few years ago. That has been put out to the public for feedback, and they are now in the process of refining the plan once again based on that feedback. So next steps. Council, you should expect to see a presentation of that next refinement of the draft plan, and that's anticipated on December 13th. So the exact meeting, whether that's a committee of the whole or a council meeting, remains to be determined, but that's the expected delivery date for that. And then the expectation would be that it would come back to council in a more finalized form early next year. January is the expected date. The next project is the bus garage and mobility study. This has also been underway for a number of months. We've had engagement with the general public. There's been some meetings at the farmers market, also online surveys. Staff went down and met with the high school students, which was also, it's always a pleasure to discuss with the students and some of the ideas they came up with. I'll tell you some of the most amazing ideas in a different venue because I don't want them to be recorded and put down forever, but they're very interesting. So the next steps on this project are that the consultant is developing some draft plans based on feedback. There will be an opportunity early in the new year to see that in a more of a draft form with the expected delivery date of a more finalized plan for council in March or April of next year. The third project currently underway is the Quality of Life Survey. This has had sort of a last-minute pivot just based on some of their recent interest in accommodating housing questions that may come out of the housing policy brief in December. So the OCP steering committee has been hard at work in refining the previous quality of life questions, identifying which of those should be continued and maintained in the next round of the quality of life survey, which ones need to be changed, which ones need to be deleted. So that they are hard at work. We've been meeting weekly for almost 2 months now. So that is going really well. However, all the housing questions have now been put to the side, and we're saying, let's just hold off on those housing questions until we know more of what's in the policy brief, so we know what questions can we ask the public that will give council the most useful information making decisions moving forward. So that's the lens we're looking at it with. So the timing will be adjusted based on the housing legislation delay, probably a few months pushed back. Originally, we were going to be delivering that survey in January, and council would have been receiving a final report from the consultant in April. So I think we could reasonably expect that to be pushed back by 3 or 4 months at this point. And the other major project, which I don't have on the slide here, is the skate park design. So that work is pretty much complete, and they have a draft plan. They just want to have one more check-in with the user group, but they are in a position to potentially present a draft plan and budget, in the next month or so. So that project is going well, and I think we'll have some product to present to council by the end of the year. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Seals. Any questions, comments? Councillor Vander.
I just had a question about the bus garage and mobility study, and specifically the mobility part that's also looking at parking. So do you take the changes that are coming down the pike for parking with developments? Is that going to affect the information going in and coming out of this mobility study?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Through the chair to Councillor Vander. The parking changes will be specific to residential development. So it would potentially have an implication on the parking requirements for Naked Naturals, which is next to the bus garage site. But the parking needs in relation to the bus garage site on its own are more in terms of the general demand for parking in the area, and they're not specific to a residential development. So I don't think that it would actually be impacted by the legislation that's currently underway. Thank you.
Speaking about Naked Naturals, have we had good communication with the owners, proponents, about their involvement in this? And because I think we approved their project some time ago. There was a commitment to work with them on underground parking. So my question basically is, how are we holding them up to proceed with their part of the plan?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So Naked Naturals has been a part of some of the stakeholder meetings that have been hosted by the consultant. So there is one more stakeholder meeting coming up in a few weeks to review some of the draft designs. So they are waiting for the town to approve a development permit for their site. So in answer to your question, yes, they would be proceeding if they had all the permits in place. However, there are still questions that we haven't nailed down, and council hasn't had an opportunity to even make the decisions needed to advance them. So the exact location of the underground parking still being worked on, and I know that this is probably frustrating for the proponent, but until a final decision is made on how much underground parking is being constructed by the town and how it relates to their site, it's really hard to finalize a proposal for theirs. So they are aware of the discussions that are underway. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Sales. Give us an update. I really appreciate that. Do you have more on the agenda as far as planning? Pathway, sustainability, economic development. That's under your bailiwick.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I will be brief. I know Mr. Dickinson is chomping at the bit to discuss pollinator pathways. However, so this is an opportunity that came up. Actually, a provincial staff person reached out to the town to see whether there was interest in pursuing this grant opportunity, and staff sat down and explored a number of different possibilities that aligned with current town initiatives, while at the same time aligning with their economic development priorities and their grant program. So the one that ended up coming out of all that discussion was this. So I'll describe the proposal and then talk about some of the implications in terms of financing and staffing. So as council and the public are aware, the town's official community plan and the sustainability plan within that identify a number of long-term economic development goals or industries that the town wants to expand into. So just to list a few, we have tourism, service, agriculture, seafood, value-added forestry, arts and culture, local business. The list goes on. It's basically every economic sector you can think of as a goal that the town's going to expand into. Not all those sectors are feasible, for the town, just given, location and some of the context of the town. And more importantly, the town really has no idea how to actually promote the sectors that are feasible. So the project that we're looking at would be hiring a consultant to do an assessment of the town's current economic situation, strengths and weaknesses and so on and so forth. Looking at the town's long-term goals for economic development as kind of itemized on this list, and assessing the feasibility of those goals and laying out a pathway to actually advancing those. So obviously these goals are very long-term, but if the town's actually to make progress on things like green technology or agriculture and food, there's probably pieces we need to be putting in place over time and continuing for a number of years. So it is a project that very much aligns with the sustainability plan. It didn't come from a council strategic initiative, and so earlier we talked about how when opportunities come up we would be presenting them to council. So this is one of those opportunities. It's a grant funding. It's an 80% and 10% of the town's contribution can be in kind. So basically that means that the province would be contributing $100,000. The town would be contributing $12,500 in cash and then $12,500 in staff time. So there's a tremendous amount of value and that could help advance the town's economic development goals, and staff do recommend council endorsement of this grant. Actually, the grant didn't need council endorsement, but as staff we feel it's very important for council to support this. Otherwise, why would we be doing it in the first place? So council, the recommendation from staff is that we get council endorsement for clarity, and we will provide that to the grant funder just to further support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a little bit surprised that this wouldn't have needed a council resolution, because when we're committing town dollars, staff time, I think that seems to be the right thing to do, is to make sure council is on board. And in light of what we saw earlier about how much we have on your plate, to add this as well. I know in the Quality of Life Survey we talk about a couple of things, housing one of them, but also some about the economics. So that would fit in with this. But I was surprised that staff didn't think council needed to make a resolution on that. Ms. Varela.
So, Your Worship, it's actually before council right now authorizing that submission. So sometimes there's provincial requirements for resolutions, sometimes there isn't. We have been having discussions about the REDIP funding stream. We met at the MLA's office. So there's been multiple levels of discussion about this funding stream. It does link to council's focus area of economic prosperity. So in your strategic plan, it is one of the 6. You don't have a lot of initiatives stacked under that. And again, the discussion leading up to this was prior to the November 1st provincial announcement. So the agenda was cutoff was October 30th. So again, we would take council's direction on this if you wanted to see this advanced.
No, that part is fine. It's just a comment that it didn't require council approval. We're doing it now, but that you could apply without council giving that direction. That was my concern. Thank you. Harrison?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the proposal for this granting application. And what I did is I went on to the provincial government's website and I looked at the 2022-2023 programs that have been funded on Vancouver Island, went through every single one. Most of them are more specific. They're not always to local governments though. Sometimes they're to a Chamber of Commerce for an economic development officer. Bluntly speaking, I don't see us funding that long term. But I think it might be good to, since the deadline was October 30th of this year, and we're past that now, the next funding window is, because it's annual, is July to October 2024. So we've got an entire year to apply. So because this is the first time I've been aware of these conversations, it might be good just to have members of council submit some of their ideas that they want to see for economic development. Then staff could have a future report saying, here's what was listed for priorities from council. Here's a brief paragraph on why we think this isn't a good idea or is a better idea. And then we can actually get a few different ideas on the table. Because I can think of things like a plan for downtown revitalization. We have some older buildings that are very old. What are models that would actually create a viable economic structure for people to, forgive me, tear down a 70, 80-year-old building and build something new in that place? And some of those decisions sometimes involve temporarily reducing taxes, which folks might find very awkward without an analysis behind it, because we don't want to look like we're giving things away to a private interest. There are several other things that could sort of immediately come to mind too. So I just think that maybe instead of committing right now when we've got an entire year to decide what particular thing we want to fund, it might be good to just give everyone a chance to submit some ideas and then maybe talk about that, just because we have so much time before the cutoff date.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about this one either. I'm wondering if it's similar to, in the past, we did the gap analysis. And I think the value in those depends on how they're used, right? So the information, you get the information, but then it's how do you use that? And that's one of my concerns, is that we have all these plans, but there's no resources to action them. So I'm curious, what exactly does this look like?
Okay. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. If I could just clarify two things, that would be great. So with regard to the granting deadline, so the grant deadline was October 30th that just passed, right? So there wasn't an opportunity to discuss with council prior to that deadline. So the timing ended up being quite tight. So next year, if there's another opportunity, then the town could certainly apply. But certainly this council endorsement would be to endorse the grant application that was submitted prior to October 30th. Now, if I could address Councillor Skipsey's question. So I think that the point is a very good one, that there's a challenge and a major gap when it comes to bridging between plans and actually doing things, right? And that's actually the impetus of this project. Is we've done 2 gap analyses in the past, and they haven't really made that bridge between the plan and actions at the council level. So that's why, it's being connected to the plan here, and then also the project does invite the consultant to lay out what would be a governance structure to support that type of thing. And by governance structure, it's what would be needed to actually support implementing these projects. And so it could involve things like resourcing. It could involve things like partnerships with, Qualicum from First Nation or the Chamber, or, so the consultant would be looking at some of those organizational barriers to actually making the action happen. So I think your point is a good one, and it's something that was considered and discussed with the provincial granting program officer. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Skipsey, correct. Second.
Well, I'm just curious, can we identify some of these areas like agriculture and food, if that's something that's been on our radar, I think more recently and whatnot? Is there an opportunity to specify areas of interest to this council, or is it they present and then we go from there?
Thank you, through the chair. That's an excellent idea. So right now it's at the stage of a grant application. Before the town would proceed with issuing a request for proposals to actually find the consultant, we would develop a terms of reference. And if council does want to narrow the scope of those areas where the council is most interested, I think that would be entirely reasonable. So at the next stage, if the grant was successful and we actually move forward to selecting the consultant, you could identify those focus areas that we really want to explore through the economic development lens.
I just remember Councillor Young raised her hand, and I don't know if she's still.
Did you have your hand up?
Okay,
No.
my apologies. I might have misseen that. I still come back to, though, that so this has then already been submitted prior to the deadline. staff has basically decided what we're going to be focusing on. I really would have appreciated being able to actually have a bit of a public debate prior to the application being made, as opposed to meetings with our MLA. That's great. And then a decision being made, because again, when I review what was successful in 2022, 2023, there are a lot of good ideas there. And it's not really reflected in this grant application. And I could think of other things too. The City of Victoria, for example, has an excellent concierge service, which is run partly through the Chamber of Commerce, but it's adjacent to City Hall, where everyone who wants to set up a small business in Victoria has someone to walk them through all the myriad requirements and rules. Now, for our community, that might not be a good fit, but I just think there are a lot of things that could have been done that this might preclude. The other thing I point out too is that some of the things that were mentioned in your introduction were brought before the previous council, right? So we had wood manufacturing brought before the previous council. We had agritourism brought before the previous council. In both cases, we didn't proceed with that. So I do think there's an issue too, that if we're going to get a plan for precisely the sectors we've rejected in the previous council, to Councillor Skipsey's point, we're going to have a plan to say, here's all the things you should support, and then when it actually comes to our council table, we don't support it historically. I think that's a little bit of a lens that I feel a little bit uncomfortable about, where we spend a lot of time, effort, and money getting a great plan together, and then there's no political will to implement the plan, or there's no opportunities to implement the plan, potentially. So that's just why, and the last concern for me is that I don't see this investment basically staying in town in some extent. Like, you're going to hire a consultant who's probably out of town. I know a couple of consultants who live in our area, but I'm not sure they'd get the contract. So a lot of the other grants were for things, some of them would exceed 100,000, but they'd be for things which were actually in the community. And this grant is essentially for a study to be produced by someone who probably is going to be based outside of Qualicum Beach. So where does the money go at the end of the day is also another lens I'm looking at. So yeah, I just have a bit of a hard time, because if it's already been submitted, we do have a time crunch where we have to make a decision pretty soon. And if we have a radical redesign of this, I'm not sure what the provincial staff would think. But it's a bit awkward to be in a position where this is something we do need to shore up. Our first strategic plan update, our only economic development initiative for our whole term is a parking study. So yes, we need to do more work. This is good. You know, we're doing the right thing here. But I do have a bit of an issue of not really having any consultation on what the initiatives could have been. And then also too, making sure those funds are actually invested in our community, not just in a study that may or may not be actioned.
Thank you. I think staff explained or tried to explain the background and how this all occurred. So I'm prepared to proceed with this, and also appreciate the comment that when we do have a consultant, that we have some input as to areas that we want to see pursued. So there is a commitment right off the start. These are the things we wanted. Now we have to carry it across the finish line. So I'm happy to, has it been moved and seconded, Ms. Swinson? Okay. So I will move the staff recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Vander, Councillor Young. Questions, comments? All right, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Harrison opposed. Engineering operations. Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Operations staff have been requested to update council on pollinator pathways in response to correspondence received from Aerosmith Naturalists. The correspondence requested that the town replant areas such as roadsides and cul-de-sacs into pollinator pathways. Pollinator pathways are defined by the Canadian Wildlife Federation as a pesticide-free corridor of native plants that provide nutrition and habitat for pollinators and helps them to disperse into new habitats. On page 79 and 80 of the agenda, you'll see a couple great examples of that. The town has passionate professionals on staff who have supported the town for years working towards naturalizing these areas and using organic means without pesticides. Attached to the report are dozens of examples of this. We continue to actively consider naturalizing areas and providing pollinator opportunities in our capital projects, such as the Memorial Avenue Reconstruction Project. Should council want to consider a pilot project, staff could review and designate an appropriate location and implement a small pilot project in a future budget year. The recommendation at this time is that Council receives for information the report on pollinator pathways dated November 8th, 2023 from the Director of Infrastructure Services and consider this pilot project as a possible 2022-24 strategic initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Questions, comments? Councillor Vander, you were first, I think.
Yeah, I just have a question about, or I guess more a comment, in terms of how we approach this. To my mind, if we're in the financial implications, it says the estimate to remove existing landscaping purchase and place growing medium seeds and initial watering is estimated to cost $3,500 for materials with an ongoing annual cost. To maintain the vegetation, mitigate damage, and remove weeds of $2,500 per year, including 0.05 full-time, I don't remember what the E stands for, but a full-time person. I'm wondering if it might make more sense to approach it in a less structured way so that we could, rather than tearing things out, use existing spaces, such as, for example, the Qualicum Beach Garden Club planted, with the town's help, planted a copper beech on the corner of Memorial and Village Way, and surrounding that tree could be potentially quite a nice meadow with wildflowers in it. So my question is, rather than saying we're going to tear things out and put more soil in and spread seeds, could we not use the existing spaces and perhaps roadways as an alternative, throw some wildflower seeds there and give it some water to get it started, and looking for a simpler way to do this. Also, perhaps the town can be involved with Seedy Saturday, which is a big event that is in the town every year, and give away seeds or have educational materials available so that community members can be involved in this rather than the town having to have staff and the town being responsible for it in a direct way. So that's what I would prefer to see happen.
Thank you. Would you care to comment about that, Ms. Dickinson?
Yes,
Go
please.
ahead.
I think when staff look at a pilot project, we would look at locations, and any area we could find that is disrupted where we would have to do as little mitigation as possible, we would. But for the most part, it will likely be a location where there's a grassed area or there's already invasive species. So we would have to go in there and basically tear out what's there already and then put in some good growing medium, not just plant seeds and hope they develop, especially in a lot of areas where we have some sandy materials, and you're going to have to make sure you have good growing material. Otherwise, the drought in the summer will kill them quite quickly.
So it was interesting seeing the report and all of the good work that our employees are doing. When you look at all the areas that staff look after, it's like, ooh, that's a lot. But I think what these community members and volunteers are looking for is just like an intentional and unified approach to creating pollinator pathways. So if the town could lead by example one area and then provide education about what it is we're doing and then encourage neighbors and neighborhoods to do the same, then I think it would spread. The idea would end up, having sort of stepping stones around the community, and that's sort of the vision, I think, that was presented to us. And then even approaches like not mowing the lawns maybe so short and leaving a bit more growth can allow moisture to stay in the grass longer and those kinds of things. So I think maybe in the long run, doing something like this could actually save us money. Maybe there's a few expenses in the first year, but it's less maintenance than what we're doing already. And I would like to see a pilot project to see what we could do with our community. And so I would support this recommendation.
Get into the voting of it. We need a motion to go beyond 3 hours. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey. Discussion, all in favor, opposed, if any, carried. Thank you. Councillor Skipsey, were you finished with your comments? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so just to sort of meld a couple of comments I heard earlier, just through the chair to staff, would there be any liability issues if we just allocated a couple of areas and we said, for the folks who care about this passionately, here are the areas where you can do it, and this is what you need to do. And if the volunteers want to do the work, then there's no financial implications to the town. In the short term, long term, yeah. If we don't continue it, we'll have to bring it back to the previous standard, and that's extra work. But just in terms of the financial implications and the staffing time, if we open up a couple areas and say, here's where, sort of like a community garden almost, where here's where volunteers can do things for a pollinator pathway in this location here, and then we'll leave it up to you, and here's a couple rules you have to follow. Would that be something that exposes us to some sort of liability, or would that just create more work at the end of the day than just doing it ourselves?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I think we could do that. There'd be some parameters you have to set, because, for instance, if you're doing it roadside, busy road, then you have to make sure that they're following safety protocols, and there's certain things that our insurance will cover with volunteers and certain things that won't. I think with the 2024 initiative, what staff were picturing is all these great ideas and making sure volunteers are part of this process and given the opportunity to have these opportunities. But there's always going to be some staffing component of that, whether it's delivering materials or whether it's actually us taking on ownership of it initially or eventually. And I think another really important part of this too, as the naturalists have pointed out, is education and telling people what they can do on their own private property, like not cutting their lawn, growing a rain garden, just a small one. It all helps.
Thank you. One area, and this is a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, Tony Vitella was the foreman with Parks, and we decided to make it more natural by the train station, that grassy field along First or Harlech, sorry. And then we saw flowers grow, buttercups, all kinds of things. And I thought, well, that's a natural way to create a pollinator path. And like Councillor Skipsey said, we didn't have to water as much, we didn't have to mow it very often. But recently it's changed, it's been cut I think twice a week. So would that be a classic example of where we say, okay, we're going to reduce mowing, we're going to allow these flowers to grow. It won't look like a manicured garden, but the purpose is different. So would that be something that would work or could work?
Definitely, Your Worship. Especially with signage as on, I think it's page 80 where it shows the signs, just educating people so they go, oh, this isn't just an unkept area, it's actually purposely planted that way.
We have the Councillor Skipsey. You moved the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Young. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Who's going to touch the BC Access? Is that part of engineering? The BC Access program? Airport Master Plan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this does relate to the airport master plan that council will be considering as part of its strategic planning process on Friday. If council did choose to proceed with that airport master plan, then this could be a potential funding stream to offset that expense.
All right, what is Councillor's wish? Councillor Skipsey.
I just wonder if there's, time sensitivity around this, or whether it could wait until after the discussions happen during strategic planning.
Ms. Varela.
I think if I make a council decision-making point, we might be okay. I'll have to reconfirm the deadline, but I think there was a reason the airport manager put it on this meeting date, but I think we could probably do it even if we had to call a special.
Okay, and Councillor Harrison?
Just to point out too, the existing avgas that we have is not the most reliable. So just for the airport users, some of them have mentioned sometimes they have issues more in the summertime. So this time of year probably wouldn't be as likely. But it is very, very old. The existing thing we have is quite old. So
That's the next item.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I got ahead of myself. I thought we were doing the avgas, and I was confused by.
Yeah, no.
That's Oliver's report. And
Yeah.
Sorry
No,
about that. I was just confused. I was flipping through the agenda. Okay, it's the airport master plan. My apologies. Sorry about that.
So that is a staff recommendation. Would someone care to move that forward? Okay, we'll defer it till we get some more detail. You mentioned that, Ms. Swenson, that it could be done at a different time.
I'll confirm after the meeting, Your Worship.
Thank you. So we'll leave it at for now. And then the above-ground aviation gasoline tank, who's speaking to that? Oh, Oliver.
Thanks, Mayor Westbrook. So this memo was regarding the replacement of the aviation gasoline fuel system that we have at our airport. Aviation gasoline is also known as avgas. Staff are recommending that Council approves the tender from Western Oil Services for the removal of the existing 20,000-litre underground avgas tank and fuel system and replacing it with a new above-ground 30,000-litre avgas fueling system, complete with a new card lock payment machine. And further, that Council increased the budget from $340,000 to $425,000, with the difference being sourced from the Asset Replacement Reserve Fund. A little background about our existing fuel system. We sell avgas to both commercial and private airplane users. The payment system that we have out there is obsolete. Parts nor technical service are available for that system, and if anything were to fail on it, it would cost nearly $30,000 to replace. The primary reason we want to move forward with this project is replacing the 20,000-litre underground tank. We believe it could be a single-walled fiberglass tank. It requires frequent refilling, and in summertime, sometimes weekly. As we've seen in the news in the past, underground tanks are prone to leaks. Our tank is about 30 years old, and the negative impacts, the negative environmental impacts and costly remediation cost is something we should be avoiding. In March 2023, the BC Air Access Program authorized a grant for us of $289,300 to replace our avgas system. We then hired a consulting company called Moore Engineering to design a modern avgas system with a couple of specifics, including we wanted to increase the size to 30,000 litres. We wanted it to be above ground. We wanted a vacuum monitoring system on it. And the reason for this was, aside from fewer deliveries, which equals less carbon footprint, of course, but we also reduced the risk of running out of fuel, which we did a few times this summer. And we also asked for a new QT pod payment system, this time a cellular-based system, which is more secure than the hardwired system that we currently have. So once we had the design completed, we put it out to tender on BC Bid, and Western Oil Services came back with the only tender. Before I continue, though, I want to make one note. The grant asks us to complete our project by March 31st. So if we order the parts now, we expect them to arrive in time for March. But if we delay this project much longer, there's a good chance that we may miss that deadline. As far as the financial implications go, the bid for the project was from Western Oil Services $405,515, and that includes the complete replacement of the system, including removing and decommissioning the old system, and installing the new system. In 2023 budget, our council approved a budget of $340,000 as per Council Resolution 23-207. Taking into consideration the $289,300 in grant funding we have available and the town contribution of $50,700, this leaves a shortfall of $65,515. Having said that, we recommend that the budget be increased by from $340,000 to $425,000 to address the anticipated cost of the project which includes a $20,000 contingency. And again, the additional funding required would be sourced from the Asset Replacement Reserve Fund. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Skipsey.
I think we've had these questions before, but is there any mechanism for us to recoup some of the costs through like a tax or a tariff on the fuel?
Oliver?
We do mark up the fuel costs, and we do make some money on the fuel, yes. Well, we could. I think it's limited in our bylaw.
Yeah, Mike, sorry, go ahead first.
Oh, sorry. I believe there was actually some difficulty with raising the costs.
Some what?
I think there was some difficulty just legislatively. Like, I think there was internal town, I can't remember if it was a policy or something else, but there were things that were already sort of in writing which sort of restrict how much we can mark up the fuel. I don't think it's something where we can essentially change the rates to whatever we want. Could be wrong in that. But I do think that this project really needs to be done. The biggest thing for me is that we don't know how old the existing tank is, and soil remediation is brutally expensive, incredibly expensive to do. So I'd rather spend the money on this. And just through the chair to staff, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, but just the cost escalation, if you just want to briefly explain why the prices have changed a bit.
Oliver?
I can explain that. So we were basing it on our Jet A fuel system costs, and at the time, we just sort of pieced that system together. We bought it in components, and it ended up being, in the end, about the same price as what we're going to be paying for this new system.
Yesterday we had a committee of the whole meeting regarding the airport, and one of the things that came up, and not from people who were concerned about airport or airplane noise or anything like that, but they were concerned about the lead in the fuel. And obviously it's determined by Federal Department, Transportation, to deal with that. But it boggles my mind that we all use non-leaded gas in our vehicles now. Why that can't happen with airplanes? I mean, personally, I would rather spend all that money to have some kind of electric charging stations for electric planes. I think people go, oh, they got one in Qualicum Beach, we can fly there. That'd be a good economic driver. But so spending all this money on that type of fuel, which we heard yesterday is not good for our health. I think Vander years ago talked about the chemtrails at the YVR and the effect on people growing produce and children and everything else. So what are the chances, you may know more about it than we do, but what are the chances of changing to non-leaded fuel for avgas?
I don't think that we have that option, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I did confirm that with the airport manager, and his statement is the new fuel system could be used for unleaded fuel if fuel type was adapted in the future. So I just want to confirm that for council.
Yeah, no, that was made clear to us. And then Councillor Harrison mentioned earlier as well that our MP can be quite effective in the House of Commons to nudge the federal government to change the use of, or change the leaded part of the gas that they use for airplanes. Anyway, that's not what we're dealing with today, to deal with replacing the fuel tank, and I think you made a very good case of why we should do it and why this motion is here today. So have Council want to make a recommendation? Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Vander.
I just had a couple of questions or comments more. If the airport was not to sell gas, how would that affect the existing commercial airlines and existing buildings or existing businesses there?
Thank you, through Chair. I don't really have a response for that, except for that they'd have to go elsewhere to get their fuel.
Okay. And I'm wondering as well if most of the people that use the airport, are they from Qualicum Beach?
Through the chair, I don't know if we've ever done a head count on how many planes are local planes and how many come from afar. I don't have an answer to that either.
I guess my,
In the summertime, the airport is very busy with planes coming and going. They're certainly not all from the airport.
okay.
Ms. Farrell would like to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do want to clarify that Mr. Watson is here for his expertise on capital projects. So I think asking him questions that could be better suited for the airport manager, I could seek additional clarification if council wants that on particular items such as that. I wouldn't know how to answer that off the cuff either, Your Worship. So if there are questions that council would like answered, staff will happily go get that information for you. We'll just take direction.
Yeah, I think that would be just good information to have, as you know, because I'm often talking at the regional district that we're providing services not just for Qualicum Beach, but for many folks who come from away, like Parksville, and they own hangars and they travel and they benefit from having an airport in Qualicum Beach, but they don't want to contribute. Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that if you didn't do that, we'd probably still have to remove the existing system pretty soon, no matter what we do. But the likely impacts would be a reduction in the number of people for general aviation who use our airport, and that would also then significantly reduce our revenue at the airport, because tie downs are one of the main sources of revenue. So I just caution that I'm not sure it would reduce our expenses on an annual basis, but it would definitely reduce our revenues. How much, obviously, is speculative. I don't know. The impacts on the commercial carrier, I couldn't say, because I'm assuming at the south terminal at YVR you can get fuel nearby, but it obviously probably would have an impact. I don't know if that would disrupt the service or not, but yeah, I'd be cautious about that.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
I'd like to ask if the fuel stations that we have, is it to support the emergency response team, like the wildfire mitigation, the medevac, and the other services that we get from emergency responders? Is that fuel for them predominantly?
Again, I couldn't speak to ratios off the top of my head. Certainly, they do make use of that fuel. I would recommend council is receiving a report on the consultation plan that they had to date. And again, we could fold in the answers to some of these questions. I'm unclear on the timing for the deadline for submitting this grant. So I'm not sure if Mr. Watson knows that off the top of his head, but I am trying to seek information as we're sitting here. So,
Yeah, I think Mr. Watson made it clear we need to move on this if we're going to do it in time, because there's a deadline for completion. So with that, Councillor Skipsey.
I had one question about the size of the tank. Like, some people see us going from a 20,000 liter to a 30,000 is that we're expanding the airport or whatever. I'm just wondering if, I know you made a case for why we need a bigger tank, but if we went with a 20,000 liter tank above ground, would we save ourselves any money on this project?
I was preloaded from the airport manager for some of these. So the new fuel system, as we mentioned, can be used for unleaded fuel if that became available in the future. He notes that reducing the size of the tank would not see a substantial savings. A large portion of the costs are the removal of the old underground system and restoration of the site.
Councillor Harrison.
So just the last thing too, the federal reports on leaded aviation fuel are things I can share with either staff or council if you're curious. They're publicly available. There's also a slideshow put forward by the federal government, but it's on an oil company's website, so I'm a little bit, I arched my eyebrow a little bit about that one. It looks legit, but you know, obviously I'd prefer it if it's coming from the federal government directly. Yeah, the sources I saw which went over the rationale as to why, and the studies that have been done, that's public info and I'm happy to share it.
Thank you. Well, as our liaison to the Airport Users Committee, would you care to make that motion?
Sure. So I just moved the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Young. Discussion. All in favour? Opposed, if any? Carried. And then the last item is the review of the comments from the public. As I mentioned earlier, when people watch at home our council proceedings, they don't have to jump up like we did in the past and make a comment. They can articulate their thoughts, and we print it in entirety. In the past, we used to put the name down and the topic, but nothing else. I think this is a better service. So with that, we need a motion to go in camera, and there is the reasons for the closure on the following page. So could I have a motion to go in camera? Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey. No, we don't need to discuss that, I think, but I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. Thank you. Have a 5-minute break for the gallery to clear of all the people that stayed till the end. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're now in camera. We're now in camera.
No. Well,
Yeah, we are. I just moved to go in camera. Yeah, we are. So the computer kind of, but the gallery should be cleared.